Welcome to the NEWSPASTE Podcast. My name's Johnny Vedmore. You know me. I'm the founder of NEWSPASTE, of course, and you've been on an adventure with me, and we've been on a fair few podcasts now. I think this is number 15, I think, and it's a very interesting one. It's one I'm looking forward to because I really, for those who can see the video of this, will see that I do have, as I like to say, a little dog in the fight. I got a little dog in the fight because I love the Beatles. The Beatles helped me learn how to play guitar, how to write music, how to sing songs, how to do it all. I mean, they were like brothers who taught me how to do the things that I wanted to do so desperately, and they were massive influence on my whole existence. Blackbird being a song that I learned very early on to schmooze the ladies with. And this is we're talking about one of the main members of the Beatles here. We're talking about John Lennon, and I'm going to talk to David Whelan. And David Whelan has a Substack, davidwhelan.substack.com, at David Whelan, and an Instagram that is very useful as well, Assassination of Lennon, or one word, which has a load of other stuff on it, which looks really intriguing about what we're going to speak about today, because we're going to speak about the misconceptions and myths surrounding the death of John Lennon by gunfire, supposedly by Mark Chapman. I'm going to learn more, and I thank you, David, for joining me today. Welcome to the NEWSPASTE Podcast.
Hi, Johnny. Thanks for having me.
Okay, I hope I did justice and managed to note the places of where people can find you.
You did.
Can you tell people a little bit about yourself and how you got into researching this? Where did it start off?
Good question. I'm a TV producer by trade. Started working in television in 1983, which is a hell of a long time ago, as a YTS trainee. Do you remember the YTS scheme?
I was a YTS boy in Blacks Camping and Outdoor once upon a time.
Well, there you go. My lucky, it was incredibly lucky, was I got a YTS at Thames Television in the film department.
It's lucky. Yeah. I mean, we all wanted something like that, but it's really hard to try and get those opportunities. Well,
yeah, it was amazing, and I was 17, and I was very green, and I walked in there, and it was basically the Euston Studios in London, Thames Television. It was as close as you can get to Hollywood in London, and I just couldn't believe what I was in. I knew the second I walked in there, this is an opportunity I can't blow. I have to make the most of this. And there was 15 of us who went in on the scheme, and I was the only one that thankfully was held on to do a job afterwards. And I think the only reason, Johnny, that happened wasn't because I was some kind of genius or anything like that. It was just I was just, out of all the 15, I had the best people skills. I could talk to people, and I could get on with people. And I think it's because a lot of people liked me that they hired me. And I think that's a lesson that kids today could possibly learn. Yeah. But of course, now they're all stuck in phones and working from home in their bedrooms.
I mean, keep on your train of thought there. But on that there, I'm a really friendly person. And I mean, I'm obviously I would say there's probably a 13-year difference between you and I, by the sounds of it. Because when I went to do YTS, it was 1996.
Right.
So I was 16. I don't know how much you got paid, but I got paid £45 a week for full time.
25 a week.
Oh well, 25. I was really good back in '83. Whoa, 25.
That's all right. That was all right. Yeah.
Buy yourself a few wimpy burgers with that, I tell you.
3 nights down the pub. 3 nights down
the pub. 3 nights down the pub straight, drinking all of the time like a fish under the table.
Imagine doing that now on 25 quid. You wouldn't get 3 minutes in a pub.
I know. It's amazing. I just can't wrap my head around prices nowadays. But let's not get into old man talk.
Let's not.
So we got this. You're talking about being polite, friendly, and happy. And I had the experience that by the time when I was polite, friendly, and happy by the 90s, everybody had gone through the 80s and were no longer polite, friendly, and happy.
Good point.
And everybody hated the fact of people being polite, friendly, and happy. So I got chastised for being too friendly all the time. Literally, in multiple jobs, I got sat down over loads of over a period from that job that I had in as a YTS recruit, or for probably about 10-15 years, I was told continuously that I was too happy and too friendly with everybody. And I'm not talking
Right.
about friendly
It's
like
crazy.
touchy or anything.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean
just a nice
just like,
guy. Yeah,
oh, he talks to people all the time. Yes, it makes some people uncomfortable. Yeah, but it makes a load of other people feel even more comfortable. And I was working in hotels. I was working in the hotel industry on the front desk of hotels,
Wow,
and
wow.
in as a manager in hotels, and I was continuously called aside for years and multiple told I was too friendly,
That's
too happy,
crazy.
and
That's mad.
I was too nice with people, all of this sort of stuff. And yeah, I found it mad, but that's because a lot of the people who rise to the top in hotels are complete narcissists who have no emotional content, and it makes them feel uncomfortable. So I think it was the industry I was in as well. I would have loved to have found an industry in the 90s, in the mid 90s, that would have accepted that and have said, oh, he's really friendly. And now my friendliness is like, this is a time, this is the era for friendliness, I find, because I go around being really nice to everybody all the time, being really friendly. And I use that as a tool to be able to see who, and this is why it's such a good tip, to see who's nasty. Because if someone's nasty to me when I'm lovely to them, then I know it's not me, and I know I can keep just going on down the road, and I don't have to have that person in my life. So it works in multiple ways. Not only do you attract the best people and the best opportunities eventually, if you're given those opportunities, but you're also you're able to see who the bad actors are. It's much easier to see if you go around having a positive outlook. So I'm not surprised about that. I'm glad to hear that it worked out for you in the 80s.
I mean, beyond lucky, Johnny.
Yeah, but
Thames TV.
it's all chance. Yeah, it's all chance. So what
Yeah,
I mean, so you rose to like become a producer
yeah, yeah. What
from
was
a
good in Thames
YTS
was,
boy? That's got to be
yeah,
that's quite good. You
yeah.
got to be proud of that.
Well, Thames was very unionised at the time. It was ACTT they were called. They're called Beck2 now. It was heavily, heavily unionised, and it was actually a big problem for me to get a ticket because the unions hated the YTS scheme because they thought it was Thatcher
Yeah,
exploiting the
yeah,
youth.
yeah.
So I was hated by all the union bigwigs. But luckily, again, pure luck. Next door in the road next door to me, I played with a guy, knew a guy, played football with him, and his dad was a big union whig in Thames.
Oh, here you go.
And
Yeah.
you just luck, pure luck, just everything seemed
Okay,
to
so
line up.
so some people, because a load of my audience will be in America, they won't understand
Mm,
what you mean by union. But I mean, as far as I know, the media is unionized to an extent that to join certain aspects of it, you have to be a member of the union. And you're saying that they only gave away a certain amount of tickets to
they
obviously
did.
limit the amount of
Yeah,
people who were able to join the
exactly.
union and be able to get those opportunities. And
You,
they obviously looked at people like YTS people as being low
yeah, well,
low caste.
even worse, a Thatcher kind of experiment. They saw me as that,
Mm-hmm.
was exploiting the youth on crap wages, and
Which it was. I mean,
to a degree, yeah, it
yeah,
was,
yeah,
it
yeah.
was.
I know that when I
But,
was doing a YTS course for 45 quid a week and I was working full-time shift and being treated like crap all of the time, I was like, this is slavery. But it did get me jobs afterwards that
It
then
did. It did.
allowed me some form of independence.
They should do it more now. Allowing someone to get their foot in the door in an industry allows them to see that industry and for the industry to see them. And then, you would figure out if you're going to go forward together. But what was great about Thames in those days, Johnny, because of the union, it was very, you were allowed to move around. So if you fancied a little go in Thames News, you could go and work in a
Mm-hmm.
newsroom. If you fancied working in sport, you could do that, documentaries. If you wanted to get a new skill, they trained you in that new skill. It was incredible. The opportunity for me was
But
just
once
off the
you're
charts.
in, once you're in these same with the BBC. Once you're in with them, you can
Mm.
skip around like that internally, and
Oh
they
yeah.
always employ internally. But that, of course, leads other people outside, especially now as these things become behemoth mainstream media platforms that are just devouring the truth and pumping out falsehoods. This has become such a dangerous, like these bubbles of
You're
power
right. Yeah,
where the
you're right.
people you're able to control the people who go in and then keep the ones you like the best just circulating around the area, so you've always got the people you trust who will do the things you want to do. So
Absolutely right, Johnny. You're dead right. But what was different then was
mhm.
you had at Thames a really great documentary tradition in the 70s. And when I joined in
Yeah.
the 80s, you had things like TVI and World in Action. Now, what's fascinating about those days, Johnny, compared to now, they wouldn't make a documentary unless it was an investigation or they had something new to say.
Was Roger Cook on ITV?
No, he was, but he was working in Central at the time, so
Oh,
I
right,
never
okay.
knew him in London. But yeah,
He was like my hero when I was young. I like looking back on that, I can understand why I do what I do, because people like that, it was just like,
well,
you're
yeah,
amazing.
he
Yeah.
was fearless, and he worked on TVI and World in Action. He worked on those strands, and nothing would get made unless they had something to say. Whereas today, it's all about sexy archive, sexy music, confirm an official narrative, i.e., Jimmy Savile is a monster, Donald Trump
Yeah.
is this, Rupert
Yeah.
Murdoch is that, and it's like, yeah, we know all this. Have you got anything new?
Yes.
Have you got anything new to say?
Yes, that's such a beautiful way to put it. And one thing I'll say about the music as well. Nowadays, especially, they use a synth and they introduce certain notes. And it's not. This isn't a conspiracy. This is like what they do in movies, like Inception and stuff. Actually, running in the background of most horror movies now is this: when they want to create suspense, is a certain note that creates a feeling of suspense and makes the hair stand up on the back of your necks. And if
Right.
you've got a speaker that can output it, you'll feel the fear to some sort of level. So what they're trying to do is target your emotions, your emotional content, not your intelligence. They've like moved across to there, because if they target your intelligence, then it means you're going to learn more, and eventually you're going to see through a lot of it.
Don't think, feel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is basically the mantra. So, but in those days, you had to think, and you were made to think, and you were
Mm-hmm.
challenged. In the end, we'll talk about this perhaps on another podcast about my TV stuff. But in the end, it did for Thames, because they did a very famous program called Death on the Rock about an SAS hit team that took out an RAA team in Gibraltar. And they wanted to kind of investigate that and show another angle to
RAA. What does RAA stand for?
the IRA, the Independent
IRA.
American
I
Army.
thought you said RRA. I couldn't
No,
work out what
sorry,
you said.
IRA. Sorry. So
Oh, right.
basically,
Okay.
that's
Right.
that was called Death on the Rock. It was a very famous
Mm-hmm.
program, and Thatcher tried to stop it, and she said, "Look, if that goes out, there's going to be big trouble for you guys." And fair play to Thames TV, they put it out, and it was factual, and eventually there was an inquiry, and it was proved that it was factual. But Thatcher, after that point, changed the franchise awarding process famously,
Mm-hmm.
and she made it all about money and not content. And before, Thames would always get their franchise because their content was award winning and everyone liked it. After that point, she made it about money. And then in 1992, I believe, a guy called Michael Green set up a company called Carlton, which was basically a company that just did acquisitions. They bought in rubbish
Mm-hmm.
from overseas. And he bid more money than Thames, and he was very into the Tory party. I think he was going out or married to a Tory MP's daughter, so he was very establishment, and they got the contract, and Thames was no more. And in
Oh,
1992, Thames
wow.
was shut
And
down, and
that's what,
today,
yeah, right.
there's not
Okay.
a brick left, Johnny, at Thames TV. It's
Wow, they just,
completely
I
obliterated.
mean, that was the power of the Tories, wasn't it? They had the problem is they had their finger in every corporate board, they had their finger right at the top levels, and they could cause real big trouble all over the place, not just a little tiny bit of trouble. They could make it really bad for you. And then, of course, Thatcher was such a bitter person. What a bitter witch she was. There's not many people in the world who have been so openly bitter and leaders at the same time. Actually, no, there
Yeah,
aren't.
she won. I mean, but in a way, she took on Thames. They stared her in the face. They said, "No, there's a point of principle here. We think we've done a good journalistic job on this documentary. It's going out. We know it's uncomfortable for the British, military and the SAS, but we're putting it out." They put it out, and Thatcher won. She changed the
Yeah, you
rules,
you
and
you
she
got
won.
you got to yeah you got to see that by those events that really what that is. It doesn't matter if it's Thatcher, it doesn't matter if it's Thames. That matters. What matters is that military operation that was meant to be secret gets outed, details get outed, and so they destroy the entity that outs the information, so that the military can continue to do stuff
Yeah,
and behind the scenes and in secret. And that's not a world we want to live in, because
no.
trust me, for the people who say that's the world they want to live in, will eventually be black bagged. Will have suddenly disappear, and their family won't know where they are anymore, and they'll have regretted ever saying that. That's
It's
for sure.
true. It's true. But what that taught me, Johnny, because I wasn't working on any of those programs. I was still very junior. I was basically a researcher at the time, mainly a film researcher. So but I saw the people that were making these programs. I was at the union meetings. I soaked up the culture. I soaked up the bravery. And I just thought, all right, everyone lost their living and everyone had to move on. And a lot of the older people probably never worked again. And there was talk of suicides and all sorts. It was a very dark time when Thames lost their franchise. But for me, it was a springboard to other things, which was great. But I remember thinking, okay, Thames is gone, but we can all look ourselves in the mirror and say, that we did the right thing. We tried to do the right thing, and all right, we lost that battle, but there's other battles to come. So that was for me a very big moral compass kind of setting for me. And the next big thing that happened just before Thames lost its franchise was the Oliver Stone JFK film
Oh
in
man! Well,
1991.
Rock, another moment in my world where just like everything, that movie, I watched it so many times. What, it's like 3.5 hours long or whatever. I
Yeah,
can't remember
yeah.
quite how long it is, but it was always so long and always so compelling and enthralling. And you knew, I mean, this was a time when all of the secrets were coming out, and you could feel it. People have waited for an accurate depiction of events that included as much of the information that was kept out of headlines and kept out of newspapers, and that really was a dramatic masterpiece. The people involved in it, Joe Pesci's performance in it, I mean, everybody's in it. Kevin Bacon's in it, even makes a
Yeah,
quick appearance, it's everybody's in it. Kevin Costner is just one of his best movies at the peak of his career, and he's playing somebody who was, of course, like massively important. So how did that affect you then? Yeah, that
well,
movie. Wow.
well. Here's the thing. I know you've got Welsh. You've got a Welsh background, Johnny. My background is actually Irish. My parents are Irish, even though I was born in London and brought up in London. So JFK, when I was brought up by a single mother, and she sent me home to Ireland in the summer holidays, and often in an Irish house, you'd see three pictures on the wall. You'd see Jesus, the Pope, and JFK. And so from a very young age, I knew that image, and I knew who he was, and he was called, one of the greatest Irishmen who ever lived. Even though, of course, he was far from being Irish, but he had the heritage. And so I always had him on my radar. So when I went in to see this film in '91, I was 25, and I pretty much at that point, I was skeptical, but I took in most official narratives as truth. And I came out because I knew a lot about his life, and I thought I did. And when I came out of that film, that was it. It's a cliche, but that was my red pill moment. I thought, oh my God, if they could do this, if they could pull this off, kill the most, important man on the planet and do it in broad daylight and get away with it, what else can they do? What else have they done since that point? And of course, JFK then leads into RFK and MLK and Malcolm X. And once you start reading up on all those assassinations that were obviously all bunched together, you think, oh my God, this is, there's almost an assassination industry going on here. There's a thread throughout all of them. And the thread is, as you said earlier, the military industrial complex and the intelligence agencies. And they're protecting, their control.
Yeah, and how do you feel? I mean, I winced a little bit. People who watch body language could rewind, or facial tells could rewind that then and see that when you said RFK, my face went, like a little bit, just a little flinch in my eyes there, because it makes me think of RFK Jr. today and the road that we're heading towards. And like, it's like some of it is I just don't want to look. I just don't want to look at the screen because it feels like it's happening again. It feels like we're repeating history over and over again. And they have proven that the assassination cover up is one of the biggest tools. Big events cover up, really amazing tools for solidifying control and manipulating the masses. And I don't even know that the world has changed, and the ability for them to keep information hidden for long enough has changed. Like I say to people, for to understand like something like Kennedy, the assassination of Kennedy, it had to be like 30 years before people really truly understood. And that statement could be said, like, you know, it happened in 63, and it's what, 92 the movie comes out that really makes people, opens up people's eyes, and then people start actually looking into it, and it's the rolling ball. And then that takes a long time. Back then you could keep a cover up going for 30 years, and nowadays that's a lot less, but that's not going to stop them doing
Well, there was, yeah,
assassinations.
it's not, but there was a lot of pioneering researchers in the sort of mid to late 60s, people like Mark Lane and stuff, who were trying to get the truth out. But with getting back to what I said about the Mail Online earlier and breaking my Lennon story, it only really got traction, the JFK truth, once that Oliver Stone film came out into the mainstream, and people went, "Oh my God, this is." Yeah, you have to. It's so easy to control a story that hasn't broken into the mainstream, because it just, as you said earlier, you know, when we were talking off mic, it just gets sidelined, and it gets strangled at birth, and it gets just covered up and swept under the carpet. It's very easy to do. But of course, once you start playing with the mainstream, as Oliver Stone did, then there's a great payback there. You know, Oliver was, you know, a pariah in Hollywood pretty much ever since. His career was, I mean, Wall Street, Platoon, JFK. After JFK, his career, if there was a chart, you could see it. It started to go downhill, and his projects became more and more difficult to get off the ground. And he was, you know, he was blackballed. And so, what an amazing man to do that. But for me, the JFK awakening, let's call it that, was something that just made me, from that point onwards, always skeptical about anything I was told. It was a very useful tool to guide me in the oncoming years. And with regards to the Lennon project that I've been involved with now for the last 3 years, I mean, I was only 14 when John Lennon died. And I've got to be honest with you, Johnny, he meant nothing to me. I barely knew who the Beatles were. I think there was a thing called Stars on 45, the Beatles. That was probably about as much as I knew about it. It was some trashy Beatles dance compilation.
So you're talking
thing.
what, like 1980, 1981 you're talking about here?
Yeah, so I was into
Isn't it
ecstasy,
amazing?
the Jam,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah,
I
of
didn't
course.
care
Isn't it
about.
amazing how 11 years go by and the whole thing, like people, they've had so much of it pumped into them that the next generation to come up rejects it so hard that they just don't bother with it. They just like, oh, that's just irrelevant to me. That's what my mum did. That's what my
Yeah,
dad did. And why would I want to care when there's bloody Roxy music?
you're right, Johnny. I mean, eventually it comes around, and you realise that Dylan
Yeah.
was a genius and the Beatles were geniuses. As you get older, you realise, oh my God, you know, I was
You
wrong to
realize
dismiss
that
these people.
that every single artist you were listening to that were inspiring to you were inspired themselves by the Beatles and taught in many ways, including production. People don't understand it. Like you go into in music production, which I've done, not always amazing and not and sometimes really well, but it's a really hard job. That's a really hard to bring sound out, to record. Back then they were recording on a 4-track, and they were recording 16 to 20 instruments, and they were multi-track and looping them around and having to use slow down tape to get it perfect, because they're using like old school methods. What they did was just extraordinary. They'd record 4 instruments, put it down to a track, and then start recording the next 3 tracks that they had let spare next to that original track, and then they take those 7 instruments and they put it down to 1 track, and they start recording it. And that sort of extraordinary method like built the way this is something I want to express as a Beatles fan who, as speaking about it. I want to cry. They've been such an important part of my life in many ways, and I've had a weird journey. Paul McCartney. When I look at Paul McCartney, I'm like, he was one of my biggest inspirations for songwriting. I loved Wings as well. All of his solo stuff up until about The Sound of Wings, I think it's called, about 1981, around then, when it just he became really trite. I don't know what you'd call it. All his music was
he lost it. He lost it.
Yeah,
he lost
yeah,
his
yeah,
mojo.
yeah. All these guys, they
all do.
They created nearly all of the methods that led to modern music production. Nearly everything was done by the Beatles. Every person around at the time who were making music looked at the Beatles and were like, oh my God, that's like the technological future. We can't even get close to working out. So it was their processes inspired all the young musicians around today. So you had then the production techniques of people like Pink Floyd and stuff that came soon afterwards. I mean, if you listen to Pink Floyd, early Pink Floyd at the same time as the Beatles, I got a bike, you can ride it if you like, and it's hard to listen to at times. It's tinny. The recordings are all right, but it's just they're really concentrating on being completely off their head and psychedelic. But then you go into the latest, it's amazing because those techniques had been, when I mentioned Roxy Music earlier, I mentioned it because 1973, 1974, Roxy Music has sounded like a band from the 90s, from the late 80s, early 90s. Their sound is so smooth. Their recordings are so crisp. The way they're producing their work only could be possible because the Beatles did everything they did. Because John Lennon and Paul McCartney, George Harrison to a lesser extent, he was much more about, his guitar and his ability to link up songs and to write the middle sections. That really made the Beatles. Without him, you could feel that you were skipping over from one section to another. George Harrison linked everything together. Ringo Starr was, a bit part, but a very special bit part who was in the hearts of everybody. But Paul McCartney and John Lennon were the guys who were really, really strict about the recording. Paul McCartney, yeah, he was really good. John Lennon was he was like Hitler when it come down to production. He was genius. He was screaming at people in the recording studio when he was doing his solo work because he wanted perfection. He wanted to get the sound, what they did for music, for the music that followed, for the music that you completely and utterly fell for in your youth. That even though we can't see it and we don't understand it, later on we understand that the Beatles were behind every single part of it.
Well, you're absolutely right, Johnny. And people like XTC and the Jam, who I was into in 1980, when John was assassinated, they all many, many times since have referenced the Beatles as their major influence. They influenced everybody. And of course, after 1980, when I got older, I got into the Beatles, and I realized they're all geniuses who completely changed the landscape forever. There's no question about that. But the key point I'm trying to say is when I was 14 and this all happened, I remember very much the day. It was on the news. Imagine was on 24/7, wall to wall. You couldn't get away from that song. I remember all the maudlin kind of wailing. I remember the fans with the candles. It was all a little bit of I don't know. I still find all that a little bit unsettling. But at the end of the day, because I don't think Lennon would have wanted that. But what was interesting is I remember how big the event was. But I literally, Johnny, I've got to be honest, from 1980 to 2020, never really gave John Lennon much thought. I always heard rumors that, Chapman might be this, Chapman might be that, or a slightly dodgy murder. But I was kind of such a JFK geek. Because that's such a massive rabbit hole, the JFK assassination. I've read about 30 books.
I know a few people who are down that rabbit hole, and
yeah,
they're all as mad as hatters.
It's deep. It can drive you mad, Johnny. And it's sad, actually. Yeah. There's so many different factions as well in that research field of JFK, who believe one thing and the other ones don't believe that. And if you believe this one small thing, then everybody else will dismiss you. But anyway, what happened was in 2020, I wasn't a fan of lockdown, certainly didn't support it. But I will say one thing about lockdown. It did allow me March 2020 when it happened, it allowed me to kind of draw breath for a minute. And I kind of parked all the projects that I was developing. some that I shouldn't have been developing. And I kind of, you get drawn into these things and you do it as favors for people. And I remember March 2020, I kind of looked at my slate and I just thought, you know what, I don't really want to be doing any of this. So I kind of, I cut a lot of ties, and I moved on from a lot of projects. I got rid of a lot of dead wood, let's put it that way. And I felt quite liberated, to be honest with you. And I had a bit of space to breathe. I didn't feel I had to go out and, do a lot of stuff. And I've got to be honest, even though I thought lockdown was a tyranny, for me, that one aspect of it was helpful. And the next thing that happened was, I think it was probably April 2020. I was out walking the dog, literally just walking the dog, listening to a podcast about JFK, Black Ops Radio, quite a famous, well-established JFK podcast. And I was listening to that, and I was listening to a guy called Jim DiEugenio on there, who's one of the most well-known JFK researchers, also MLK and Malcolm X researchers as well. But anyway, I was listening, and he was talking about JFK. And then someone mentioned on this podcast that the doorman at the Dakota when John Lennon was murdered might have been a Cuban, ex-Cuban, far-right, CIA kind of assassin kind of thing. I just thought, wow, that just sounds bizarre. How the hell could I've missed that? So I literally just went home after the walk, Johnny, and I sat down at the computer and I started to dig and Google. And I know that's only one layer of truth, Google. So I knew I had to go deeper than that. And the deeper I went, Johnny, the more I realized, hang on a minute, none of this actually makes sense. Because of my research background at Thames, and I probably have OCD, and I once I get my teeth into something, I just can't stop. And I just started to get I used to go deeper and deeper and deeper. And I just thought, there's no detail here. There's a lot of when, there's a lot of where, but there's no how. No real specific detail about how, and there's no specific detail that makes sense about why this event happened. And that troubled me. And the more I dug, I started to buy a lot of books, and I started to read the books. And again, they were all contradictory, and they were all very light on detail. And I started to get really, really suspicious. And I just thought, you know what, I've got time here. I don't know how long this lockdown crap's going to last. So I'll just keep going, which is brilliant. It allowed me to do that. And then it all just started to unravel. And I think probably at this point, it might be wise for me to tell everyone who don't know the case too well what the official narrative is. And then perhaps we can jump off and talk about what I discovered. So
that sounds like a good idea. That sounds like a good idea. So, but just before you do that, I'll give you how I felt about the whole thing, because
please do.
Because my mum was a deep Beatles fan. I actually, through my teenage years, maybe from about 11, I'd say, till about 16, 17, probably about the time my mum and dad started having a divorce. Really, I just, around that time as well, it's just like that period when your brain changes and you have to be rebellious. I didn't listen to the Beatles all around the rest of the time. I couldn't help but to listen to the Beatles because we had all of the records in the house, and my mum was such a deep fan of the Beatles, and she didn't like Paul so much. She they've all got their favorites, but she was really like, really didn't like him. She didn't like him. Partly, it's weird. It's partly because she loved reading newspapers and MSM stuff so much, watching MSM stuff so much, and they just treat him as amazing, and then go into gossip about Paul McCartney, and I think it just leaves everybody to being like, I don't want to know anything more about him, thank you very much.
Overexposed in a way, wasn't it?
And I think that's kind of maybe on purpose, and I think he was brought in by the establishment in many ways.
Every man, establishment. Sure.
And it feels distasteful. I saw McCartney live, and like I say, I have been is for me, if I'm going to say for Beatles, for music, for the actual songs that came afterwards, and the music that they imported into the Beatles, McCartney is by far my favorite. By far, his working of the bass guitar is just second to none, and he's adaptive. He doesn't have to play he's got like a rhythm in his head. He's very rhythmic, and so he can adapt to the notes that go within that rhythm. He doesn't have to stick around, so he can go up and down, and he can mess about all over the place, and he can play any guitar, and it's like lackadaisical. He's just doesn't really matter. He's just playing away, and that sort of skill just shone through. But my mum was really strongly a Lennon fan, and most of my friends were really strongly Lennon fans, and I found it all a little bit Lennon, give peace a chance, imagine all the people. It's all a bit like tongue-in-cheek by that point, mainly because when I didn't listen to Lennon separately from the Beatles, and what I took in from Lennon was like all of these sort of like airy-fairy dreamy Yoko Ono stuff that just didn't like connect with me at all.
No.
And I was just it's all pretentious, it's all this, all that. In a sense, now I've gone down a road where I look at it and I go, oh man, I understand exactly why he was doing that, exactly why he didn't want to be a part of the system, and they didn't show us all of the more important stuff. When you hear him actually speaking in depth about what's going on in the world, he is a genius. He is a genius. It's like he can apply what he understands in music and how it works to how the rhythm of life goes as well, and how to, he could see through stuff and explain it to people. That was a thing that's so dangerous for the establishment at the time. And the more I heard of Lennon speaking, the more I was like blown away. I was like, why have I never heard this before? Why have I never, every time he's always saying silly stuff, mixing words around back in the Beatles days and saying like words.
But also Johnny in the Beatles days, remember, he was the guy who was constantly criticizing religion bravely, I think, at the time. He was calling out religion and the hypocrisy of religion at the time. And the religion's connection to the establishment and to the military. So Lennon was the first to do that. He called out the Vietnam War to his own detriment, and he also called it. He made that famous quote about the Beatles being bigger than Jesus. So he was talking about religion and culture in a very brave way. And what he did in the early 70s, he was very much into Northern Ireland, and he was very close to his Irish roots. In fact, if you listen to some Beatles people who knew them at the time, friends of the Beatles, a lot of the Beatles when they were younger actually considered themselves Irish, because George and Paul and John all have Irish backgrounds.
Hey! One day, work that I have been researching for donkey's years now will surface about something, and part of it is related, like one of the biggest events in history, and I think I've got the answer to, and a lot of it revolves around Liverpool. And if you look in 1840, 1813, 1840, 1850 Liverpool, you've got this place that suddenly gets this influx of Irish immigrants from the famine in Ireland, all come in all at the same time, and it increases the size of an already big Liverpool, because Liverpool was the main shipping port out of the UK at that point, in like the 1840s especially, and they this influx of Irish immigrants boosted the size of Liverpool and the population of Liverpool by 50%, and suddenly there was loads of Irish kids running around without shoes on trying to steal everything from everybody, because they had nothing, and this amazing scene. If you set the scene of what Liverpool was like there, it was like this rampant ground where the Irish people had been dumped after policies had been implemented to basically force starvation upon their country by the British government. And what happened was they were kept in a kind of camp. Liverpool become this weird camp where they could pick up these kids, stick a rope around their leg, stick a sticker on the rope, rope and sell them off to the ships. And so these kids will then go, Irish kids who had no hope, massive families, were sold off to the ships by the time they're 13, 14, and have no connection to what it's like to really be Irish, because they got basically no memory of anything but struggle. And then the struggle itself became what it meant to be Irish. That's what I think happened during that period, is that the struggle itself, and that came out in the character of the Irish people. So the people who were in Liverpool by the time in the 1960s, they knew that they were different from the English. They knew they had this massive influence, and they did. And it's everything: music, accent, character.
Well said. Well said, Johnny.
Go up to Liverpool. It was my first time in Liverpool. Was just I've never been to a city, and I say I've been loads of places, all right, and I'm not saying this half-heartedly. I have not been to a city which is so loving, welcoming, where the people are just so special. They're not like nothing else around Britain, like nothing else. It got close bits of it in the valleys and Cardiff, and I think similar background of industry and stuff like that. But Liverpool is a special place with a special breed of people, and they are inextricably linked to a history of Ireland and Irish history, and I think the people there know it and they feel it. So I can understand. I wanted to interject there because it's really important to understand. Like, important. Irish and Liverpool is almost the same thing.
And that's where the Beatles came from, Johnny. That was very well put. And you're right. John and Paul and George knew this, and it was in their DNA. They all had Irish members of the family. And I think what Lennon did in the 70s with Irish republicanism. He wrote songs, he attended concerts. But what he started to also do in the mid 70s is he started to attack Richard Nixon, who was trying to get him deported through, FBI tails and all kinds of things. It was, Men in Black were on his tail. I've spoken to many people who knew Lennon at the time, and it was literally phone tapping, Men in Black, a lot of intimidation. But John fought that. And then obviously when Nixon fell at Watergate, John was in the front row laughing his head off at Nixon. So that Nixon-Lennon hatred of each other is the key to unlocking John Lennon's assassination, because Nixon and Reagan were very close, very tight. When Nixon went down in Watergate, the first person he spoke to on the phone was Reagan. When Reagan won the nomination, first person he spoke to was Nixon. Nixon and Reagan were like that. They were very, very tight. And John took on a very powerful, dark, evil man when he took on Richard Nixon. And I'm not going to reveal it until my book comes out, but there is a very clear link to the people that I believe that was behind John Lennon's assassination and Richard Nixon. A link that's irrefutable.
Well, that's intriguing. I'd like to talk to Dr. Lee about this. I've been on a podcast a few times talking about the Pottinger pieces recently, and she talks in glowing terms about Nixon and Reagan. I think it's in context to all of the other people around. And these like sides that form, because if you're talking about by the time Reagan's in office in 1980, or wins the presidency in 1980, he's got this other faction behind him as well, which is a really dark, powerful faction that and here we go, right? And this is what I think Dr. Lee and other people may say. I don't want to put words in their mouth, but I think they may say, to defend Reagan and Nixon, is that behind Nixon was this dark, deep state machine headed by people like Henry Kissinger and others. And then behind Reagan was this dark, deep state machine headed by George H.W. Bush and others. And
Rumsfeld,
these guys...
Cheney.
Yeah, these guys were were chosen awkwardly as the front people for an ideology that they didn't necessarily agree with, but was in bed with, because it suited all of their ends in many different ways. And that
Reagan for sure. Yeah, Reagan
yeah,
for sure. Reagan,
yeah.
he didn't have the
Nixon, I
intelligence, to be
can't
honest.
see, I can't. But this is what I'm giving. I'm giving the argument of what I think other people who are defensive of Reagan and Nixon may say in this regard, is that
Yeah.
the two, that in a sense, Reagan and Nixon's underlings were the ones who had the power of assassination, and it suited them to use that power while these guys were in office, because they would definitely get away with it because these
Well,
guys
I
were in
think,
office.
I think Nixon, it's been well documented, was possibly behind the Allende assassination,
Oh
and gave the order for that. So I think he was well up for ordering
I
an
reckon so.
assassination when it suited. Reagan was clearly, he was an actor, and he was acting, and he was acting a great part. I mean, he was an actor. So I hear what you're saying, Johnny. In essence, Nixon, all leaders, I think, since JFK are puppets, and they're controlled from men behind the scenes, and
Probably Nixon.
Yeah, and I wasn't looking for Nixon, by the way. Yeah, I didn't go in with any. No worries. I didn't go with any sort of preconceived. It must be Nixon. He just emerged. The people that I discovered that were probably behind it knew him, and they were connected to him. And I just thought, okay, well then,
definitely no. Definitely, this period, I've been carefully watching this period, not only through the recent Pottinger series, where Pottinger enters into Nixon administration and is able to get away with covering up assassinations and conspiracies and all sorts of things, and harass people using these dark techniques and intelligence agencies, and then using Orlando Letelier and Operation Condor, the assassination of Orlando Letelier and Operation Condor, as an excuse to domestically surveil. And that was really interesting place to start looking, because I was living in Chile when I started looking in there, and it's like, well, Allende and stuff, that was definitely, I mean, CIA were right up in front, and it was openly a CIA coup, and the CIA even admitted, we did all of this stuff.
Great job.
You know, what about it? And and then it led to that moment where in 1976 Orlando Letelier's car's blown up on Embassy Row in Washington, and you've got this moment where, is it the Americans have given permission for that to happen in some way, so that they can then get domestic surveillance for themselves, or is it just that they use the excuse to get domestic? All of the stuff that happens, whether they're involved in it or not, they're going to manipulate it for their benefit. All of these people in charge, and the Nixonian people, the Ford people were the same. Carter was, I mean, the CIA and stuff under Carter, that's run still by George H.W. Bush.
Carter was, he was no halcyon break. He was a continuation.
So all of these guys had the same flavor. Once they had wrested control from JFK by means that we all saw, from that moment on, it did seem like the whole thing was sealed up, and everything is like a selection of operations after that, really like carefully planned intelligence operations, and a lot of it was about public perception. Like nearly everything was about public perception and managing public perception. And of course, Lennon was awful for public perception of these guys. So I can completely see, and I know what these guys are doing. They're doing terrible things, terrible, awful things. So why wouldn't you? So continue. Where were we? Sorry.
No, that's great. It's important to set the scene, Johnny. Thanks for that. We need to understand that Nixon was in the background. We need to understand that Carter was no knight in shining armor. He was a continuation of the military-industrial complex and the intelligence state. And Reagan was, he was the ka-ching, really. I think they realized they had a man who was completely controllable, didn't really understand detail much. And, you got Rumsfeld and Cheney and Bush behind the curtain, pulling the strings for the next 20, 25 years. So it worked out really well. And you can't get away from the timing with Lennon. When he was assassinated, it was just literally weeks before Reagan took power. But we'll get back to the official narrative, which I think is important because it's one of the most misunderstood murders in history, really. It's one of the most famous assassinations. It's up there with JFK for sure, and Martin Luther King. I think it's in the top 5 of all time. And what people think happened is that there was multiple witnesses. If there was anything nefarious, Yoko would have seen it because she was with John. And it was an open and shut case. The guy who did it, everyone saw him do it, and he admitted he did it. He got arrested. He's so horrible, we must never mention his name again. It's an open and shut case. Why are you digging up this past? But when you actually get into the facts of it, it's just not like that at all. So the official narrative, Johnny, I think the thing that your listeners or viewers need to get their head around is they have to get the geography right. So what you've got in the Dakota, which is this big Gothic building that John and Yoko lived in, you've got a driveway which was used originally for horse and cart, and it's kind of cobbled. At the end of the driveway is an iron gate, but before you get to that iron gate, you've got a door on the right as you face it, which has got a little kind of glass vestibule porch area. That's called the vestibule. On the opposite side of that in the driveway, you've got a alcove and a lift that goes down to the basement. So that's the geography. And obviously at the front of at the head of the driveway is the pavement, is the sidewalk. And that's where the doorman had his little gold booth, and that's where Mark Chapman was standing. So it's very important that you get that geography right. So Mark Chapman is at the head, the mouth of the driveway. He's not at the back of the driveway. He's on the street almost. And he's standing near the gold booth on the left-hand side at 10:45 on the 8th of December, 1980, waiting to assassinate John Lennon from what he has described as a compulsion, as a runaway train, as something that he had to do. So John and Yoko at this point, earlier in the day, I won't get into all the signing the album earlier and stuff like that. Let's just get to the specifics of the murder. John and Yoko were recording a Yoko song called Walking on Thin Ice that night at a recording studio in New York. Around about sort of 10:30, John says to the producer, I want to go to a diner and have some food before I go home to the Dakota to sleep for the night. So they leave the recording studio, but for some reason they don't stop off at the diner. Now the diner is actually on the way home from the recording studio to the Dakota, but for some reason, which I'll get into later, they don't do that. So they turn up right on time, 10:45, outside the Dakota in a grey long limo. So they pull up outside the Dakota. This is the official narrative, by the way. I'll completely obliterate this shortly. Yoko gets out first. She starts walking down the driveway, past Mark Chapman, past the doorman, and is walking over to the end at the right, to the vestibule doors, which lead up some stairs into the Dakota lobby. Through that lobby, you've got some concierge offices behind the sort of desk lobby area on the left, and beyond that, you've got the apartments, which the concierge, a guy called Jay Hastings, buzzes you through into your apartments. So Yoko's heading towards the Dakota vestibule, up the stairs into the lobby. Behind her, round about sort of 10, 15, 20 feet, it varies a lot according to who you listen to. John gets out of the limo. John walks past Chapman, following his wife, who's way ahead. He looks at Chapman. Chapman looks at him. John walks past Chapman. And now this is according to Chapman and the NYPD and the DA's office. So this is the official narrative. When he's about 20, 25 feet away from Chapman and he's very near the vestibule doors, Mark Chapman gets out a gun and shoots John with 5 bullets from a 5-bullet revolver .38 gun. So it's a chamber. So it's bang. It's not automatic. So it's bang, 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 bang. So he has to wait a split second before each shot. He says he shoots John with 5 bullets. And Mark Chapman says, to this day, he's never wavered. He thinks he shot John 4 times in the back. He doesn't quite figure out what happened to John after he shot him because he can't remember why John wasn't there. He said in the past that I fired the bullets. He doesn't remember pulling the bead, the hammer. He doesn't remember aiming. He remembers 2 other things, though. He remembers the fact that he was surprised the bullets were working, which is a very strange thing to think. And he also says he doesn't quite know what happened to Lennon after he started firing. Lennon just disappeared. He doesn't remember sort of Lennon falling down or opening a door or going up some steps. He remembers none of that. So it's a very fragmented memory for Mark Chapman. So what you've got in that driveway, you've got Mark Chapman doing this apparent event. You've got the doorman who's there, a guy called Jose Padermo, who we'll get into shortly, who was the alleged Cuban Bay of Pigs CIA guy, which he wasn't, by the way, but We'll get into him shortly. You've got a concierge called Jay Hastings who's in the Dakota in the lobby area where Lennon and Yoko are heading to. Now, he's got a window that's open that's behind the vestibule doors in the Dakota driveway, so he can hear stuff going on, which is very important. So he's kind of an audio witness. You've also got a lift operator called Joseph Manny who's in the basement, which is accessed through a lift, which is opposite the vestibule doors on the right-hand side, but he's down in the basement. Now, he hears gunfire. So you've got three witnesses of it, well, you've got four witnesses that are important. You've got Yoko Ono, you've got Jose Padermo, the doorman, you've got the concierge Jay Hastings, who didn't see it, but he heard it, and you've got the lift operator, Joseph Manny, who's down in the basement and heard gunfire. So that's the setup, okay? It's very important that you know who, there was no one else there. There was no witnesses walking past the pavement. There's a cab driver who said he saw Chapman. We'll get into him shortly. But there was no other witnesses that saw the murder, okay? Now, what's really interesting about this is, according to the statement and Chapman's statement, and according to the NYPD and the official narrative, when John was struck with these 4 bullets in his back, apparently hollow point bullets, it's very important that Chapman, the DA's office and the NYPD all say he was using hollow point bullets. They've said it for 42 years. So they all say that happened, which were really destructive bullets, by the way. So when a hollow point bullet hits someone, it opens up inside them. It doesn't normally pass through, and it just literally rips up their internal organs. It's a horrific bullet to use. But apparently John, with these 4 hollow point bullets that all were struck and apparently damaged his heart. We know all the artery drain in his heart was damaged. He then walks up to the vestibule door with these 4 big holes in his back. He pulls open the vestibule door. He walks into the vestibule small porch area. He walks up to some steps, walks up 6 steps, pulls open some very large mahogany open doors, walks into the lobby area, turns left, goes through a swinging door, which is attached to the desk on the left in the lobby area. He's now in Jay Hastings' concierge front office. He has the wherewithal somehow to say to Jay Hastings, "I've been shot." He then carries on this incredible journey through Jay Hastings' front office into a back office that's beyond Jay Hastings' office and collapses and dies. Now, the problem with that, let's just get straight to it. If you talk to all the doctors and nurses who treated John, and even the very dodgy chief medical officer who actually performed the autopsy, they all are very consistent in one thing. They all say that when those bullets hit John, the amount of damage around his heart that instantly happened and occurred, he was dead on impact. But somehow, according to the official narrative, John got out of that vestibule, got out of that Dakota driveway and went on this fantastical journey through the vestibule stairs, doors and offices. Utter hogwash. It's almost impossible to believe that he could do that. So once I got all that information very early on, that this was the official narrative and this was this alleged journey that John went on, I thought, okay, I need to look at this slightly differently. So I thought, what I'll do is, with JFK, you can tell an awful lot from the very dodgy autopsies that were done on him and all the horrible medical evidence that was counter and didn't actually fit the official narrative, especially the early JFK autopsy that was done in Dallas before they managed to nab his body and take it to Washington. So I thought, what I'll do is I'll contact the doctors. I'll contact the doctors that tried to treat John and see if I can get some information from them. Now, the problem with that is there's a doctor called Stephen Lynn, Johnny, who for 30 years has been on every single TV documentary and is featured in every magazine and book saying, I'm the doctor that tried to save John Lennon and I held his heart in my hand. So this guy has basically controlled the narrative about John's medical condition, but he never ever goes into detail about where on the back John was shot and where the entrance and exit wounds were. So he's annoyingly controlled that part of the story. Problem is, Johnny, he didn't actually do any of that. He was in the room. He came later because he was the head of the ER. He came later when they were trying to save John, never touched John's body, never helped, never assisted. But he was the guy that came out and spoke to the media and said, John Lennon's dead outside the Roosevelt Hospital. And he got a taste for fame at that point, Johnny. And he thought, do you know what? I think I'm going to run with this. I think I'm going to be the doctor that tried to save John Lennon's life. Problem is, Johnny, the actual doctor, the surgeon who tried to save John Lennon's life, a guy called Dr. Halloran, lovely guy, he, for some strange reason, I've asked him many times why he didn't do it, he just basically sat back for 30 years and allowed Halloran to lie. because according to him, he just didn't want the hassle, he didn't want the fame, he didn't want to sort of upset the apple cart.
Checked out his other autopsies that he's done, this guy?
Well, no, this isn't an autopsy. This is the surgeon.
Sorry, have you seen any? Have you checked out any of the other surgeries that he's done?
He's been operating. He was operating about 5 years before Lennon came in. So mid to late 70s, he's operating. He was a surgeon right up until a couple of years ago. He retired last year. So a flawless career, guy,
right.
Which is great. But what's interesting is I didn't ring him first. I rang another doctor, Johnny. I didn't ring Stephen Lynn because I kind of knew. In 2011, Halloran came out. Halloran came out in 2011 and said, "This guy's lying. I'm the guy who did it." So I knew Halloran was the kind of now official guy who did it. So I won't bother with it. Can you imagine?
I mean, keep away the trainer you thought you're thinking.
Yeah.
Can you imagine being that guy who's just like, you've lived off a life, and it's like a indirect lie that'll get you a really tiny amount of fame in a certain area. I mean, God, can you imagine living that life? Anyway, go on. Sorry.
I don't know how these people live themselves, Johnny, to be honest. But here's the thing. I actually contacted another doctor before I spoke to Dr. Halloran, because there's another doctor called Dr. Frank Veteran who also claims that he tried to save John Lennon's life. So I thought, I'll ring him up and I'll have a chat with him. So I had a chat with him. And he gave me an hour-long discussion about how he tried to save John.
I thought you were going to say he was animated like in the Yellow Submarine when I...
Well, yeah, he was very animated when he was talking to me, Johnny. He was saying, but what he said that John was shot all down the left side, right? Which I thought, okay, that's interesting. That's not in the back, as we've always been told. So he kind of muddied the waters as well, as much as Stephen Lynn. So he gave me this very convincing 1 hour testimony. He also posted a video online of him talking into camera about his traumatic experience of trying to save John Lennon. So I thought, but something was off. So I thought, I'll ring Halloran. So I rang Halloran, managed to get through to Halloran. And the first question I said to Halloran was, just tell me, Dr. Halloran, why wasn't Frank Veteran featured in a dramatic film in 2016 called The Lennon Report? Because what happened in 2016 was, because there was so much confusion about the medical stuff, someone did a dramatic film as a reconstruction of what happened to John when he came into the hospital, right? But Frank Veteran's not in there. And I said to him, why wasn't Frank Veteran put in the Lennon Report film? He went, well, the reason they didn't put him in the film was he wasn't there that night at the hospital. So I thought, okay, so we've now got a second lying doctor. That's quite disturbing and a bit odd. There was also another doctor, a guy called...
Happens a lot in these parts.
Oh, yeah, it does. Well, you've got a doctor called Richard Marks who did help out, but he also embellished his part in it. He said he held John's heart in his hand. So you've kind of got three line doctors. But anyway, I got to Halloran eventually. And the first thing I said to Halloran was, this is very early on in my investigation, I said, so just tell me again, Dr. Halloran, where John was shot in the back. You know, what part of his back was he shot? And he went, he wasn't shot in his back. And I just remember that it was that one moment where I knew my life was about to change. And I went, what do you mean? He said, well, he was shot in his front, above his heart, 4 bullets in a very tight grouping. Wow. And I said, how sure are you of this? And he went, well, I'm completely sure because 3 bullets came out of his back and 1 bullet stayed in. So the fact that 4 went in the front and 3 came out the back means you can't say that they got confused with the entrance and exit wounds.
Yeah, but it's not only that. I mean, you don't fire 4 rounds or 5 rounds from a revolver and get a tight grouping without a lot of practice. But
do you know what he said, Johnny? Do you know what he said to me when I said that to him? I said, Chapman was 25 feet behind him. He said, not even a Navy SEAL could do that. Not even a Navy SEAL. Even if John turned around.
It's just no way. It's just no way. That is insane. Yeah.
It is insane. So he was shot from the front. And the next thing I sort of said to him was, well, is there anybody else who can corroborate what you're saying? He said, yeah, there was 2 nurses that helped me try and save John's life, Deatra Sato and Barbara Camera. They were featured in the Lennon Report film. Give them a call. So I rang the nurses up and I said, right, tell me the story. They said, okay, Deatra Sato was the first one on the scene with Halloran when John came in. They cut his clothes off, as you do. They turned him. So they looked at the 4 in the front. They looked at the 3 on the back. They had his body. His body was pretty much naked, so they could check whether there were any other wounds. They said there were no other wounds. 4 front, 3 back, upper left chest. They started to work on him. Barbara Camera then came in to help assist. She saw the 4 in the front as well. After they couldn't save him, Barbara and
Wait a minute,
Dee,
sorry, just the
yeah,
four in the front, three in the back. So there was three exit wounds, and
three
there was
exit wounds,
obviously a
and
bullet
one
inside
stayed
him.
in. One
Yeah, okay,
stayed in
okay.
up, and that was the one they believe was the upper left chest, upper
Right,
left near the shoulder. The one that was
right,
near
right.
the three near the heart passed through. And they're saying also, it's very important, Johnny, to stress this, that they didn't move around. They were direct line of fire. They could see from the way they went in the front, they came straight out the back. Now, again, remember, hollow bullets don't do this. Hollow bullets stay in. They don't. They're designed not to pass through a person. But for some reason, three of these bullets passed through John. So I said to Barbara and Dee, okay, what did you do next? I said, well, after we couldn't save him, it was our job to wash John and to shroud him. So they took his body to another room. They washed him very respectfully and they shrouded him very respectfully. And this gave them another chance to see John's wounds close up. And they checked his whole body. They washed his whole body. So they knew for sure there were no other wounds in his back or lower back or leg or arms, just those 4 wounds in the front, 3 out the back. Once he was shrouded, then another very strange thing happened. The chief medical officer at the time, a guy called Elliot Gross, a very dubious man who's been accused multiple times of falsifying autopsies, he turns up that night. Now, what's weird about that, Johnny, is he was going to get the body a few hours later at the medical office, right, to do the autopsy. So him turning up at a hospital to look at the wounds, look at John's wounds, was completely unheard of. The nurses said they just literally couldn't believe he was who he said he was because they'd never seen this happen before. And they were saying, well, what are you doing here? He said, well, I want to see the wounds. Take off his shroud. I want you to rip all his shrouds off and I want you to sit him up. I want to get a close look at his wounds, which is a really, really weird and suspicious thing to do. So they argued with this guy for 10 minutes and said, look, this is disrespectful. You're going to get the body in the morning. Why do you need to see the wounds now? But he was in a real hurry to see the wounds. So he insisted that they cut the shroud off. They sat John up. I don't want to get gory here, but they said John started to bleed out again, which made them very angry. What Gross then did was he walked around the bed, just looking at John's front and exit wounds, saying nothing at this point, just observing. Then he walks out. And then they had to wash John again, shroud him again, and they were absolutely furious. But what that did, Johnny, was it allowed them to see John's wounds again, twice, close up. So these nurses are adamant. There's just no doubt in their mind.
There's no one else who would have seen closer. Yeah.
These 2 nurses are still alive, and they still can't believe why the whole world thinks the opposite. They feel kind of isolated and angry that no one's listening to them. Because I mentioned
loads
that
of
Lennon,
these people throughout history, scattered throughout these cover-ups, who are
for
just
sure.
like without, and of course they must be very scared for a lot of their life about saying anything, because of course it only takes one add one to get to the 2.
This is true, and what's interesting, Johnny, is they kind of they kind of, when the Lennon report came out, they thought, oh, great, this film's happening and it's a drama and we can have some input. And they did have input, and the producer spoke to Hannah and the nurses. And they read the script. They went, hang on a minute, this script's wrong. The script says he was shot in the back. It's wrong. He was shot in the front. And they all sort of had this slanging match with the producers for ages. And the writer came in the room, and the writer said to them, well, we're going with the back. And they said, why? He said, well, that's what Wikipedia says. And the nurses came out with this great quote. They said, well, Wikipedia wasn't in the room that night when we tried to save John Lennon. So how the hell does Wikipedia know? Which is a great line.
No, that's a real shot, man. That's a real shot. Yeah.
Just brilliant. New York, no messing nurses who just say it as it is. They're wonderful ladies. And so basically then that kind of got me then at that point, when I got all that information, Johnny, I just thought, hang on a minute, there's a cover up here. This is not right. Chapman couldn't have caused those wounds from where he was. So I thought, now need to find out where John was when he was struck. Was he in the driveway? Was he in the vestibule? Where was he when he was struck? So I thought, I now need to sort of talk to all the people that were at the Dakota. And I now need to talk to all the people, all the police officers and the detectives that tried to do the case. So I went deeper and deeper. But just before I get off the medical stuff, one other thing that's really important to know is what would have really given history the complete lowdown officially on John's entrance and exit wounds is what's called an ER report that Dr. Halloran and the nurses all filled out that night. So Halloran started it, and had a stick drawing of John's front and John's back, like a stick man, with the entrance wounds and the exit wounds put on the stick man, and a full written report underneath saying This is where he was shot. This is where the exit wounds were. This is what we tried to do to save him. We cut a little thing into his chest. We tried to pump his heart, blah, blah, blah. That ER report went missing that night. No one knows where that ER report went. When the Lennon report went to find it, they said, forget it. You're not going to find it. They couldn't find it. They went through all the hospital records. That disappeared that night. And one of the main bits of evidence that would have completely verified what those doctors and nurses knew just disappeared.
This world is so simple. It's so simple. I mean, there's certain moments when they know, okay, we can leave all of the rest be hearsay, conjecture, just people talking. We could paint it all as that, but only if we take out this piece of information and this piece of information, and then the cover-up's done. As long as you've got the key fundamentals not written down on paper, and everything just comes out of people's mouths, you can just deny, obfuscate, and you can move on. And before you know, things become legend. And if it does get too hot, each time it gets hot, you just implant a load of fake information onto the scene. You push in a load of people who are going to promote different ideas that are kind of like got all of the facts there, but a little bit of detail here and there that's just gonna, skewer the facts forever, because or obscure the facts forever. Of course, I can hear you suggesting that's happened all throughout this, because it's what you see in every cover up anyway.
For sure. Poison in the well, Johnny. Poison in the well.
Yeah.
Hey,
listen, I work in an area where now I just like, oh man, I've had a few years where like I've had many experiences over the past, say, 4 or 5 years, where I feel that people have tried to enter into my life, especially early on. One experience before I got into the Epstein case with a random Mexican. I live in Wales. I mean, Mexicans stand out when you live in Wales.
Yeah, I bet.
Just suddenly turned up in Cardiff and started dealing weed to me and becoming like then like doing LSD with me, and then doing LSD and trying to implant things in my head, including like flat earth stuff and all different types of things, in a way that I sat there like I had already been through like a lot of psychedelic experience on my own terms, and I'm like, a high level drinker. I understand the process of what happens in reality when I'm extremely high on an epic dose of LSD or mushrooms, so I understand the difference. And I've been through multiple situations where I think people have tried to implant loads of different stuff into my mind, and I've let them go. One day, listen, well, I continue along a path. One day, I'm gonna tell the story of my life. Maybe if I get that far, if I get that far, because I am treading a dangerous road. I can tell the story of my life, and some of it has been messed up. And these people use all sorts of methods to get into your mind, to make the people who are most likely to tell the truth to poison that well specifically. If they see someone who's able to be concise and cut through the bull and get to the point that they don't want you getting to, then they'll poison. All they have to do is poison that well. So when you're talking, and this is the same when a cover up on a scene, any type of cover up includes this. So when you're talking about the statement, you're talking about the characters who are there on the night when Lennon shot, and he walks into this area where one person is, apparently the official story is, one person isn't going to see it, one person's downstairs, hears a gunfire, there's not much in the way of witnesses here. That's a lot of ability to control everything. And I've heard, like, within, and this is a dangerous thing to say out loud on the podcast, but there's a man who gets attacked heavily by the BBC called Richard D. Hall, and some of his work is impeccable. And one of the things he looked into was the Joe Cox murder, and it's within in the statements, you've got that Jo Cox gets shot in the head, and someone goes towards her to help, and she gets up and says, "No, no, please, please don't. Stay back. Stay where you are. Stay where you are," and then get shot again. Now, in moments like those, whether it's the statement itself, or it's like how it gets the person who's given the witness statement, or whether it's in the police are somehow corrupt, or whether later on that gets tampered with, or people get influenced in other ways. You know, it just one little piece of jiggery pokery makes the whole case hard to work out, and makes a lot of people turn away from it, because a lot of the time, especially when events like this, assassinations are fresh, you're going to have lots of theories, and then they die away eventually. So where were we? Sorry, I had to go off on a tangent there.
No, it's important. It's important
Yeah.
what you said. I think we got to the point where the medical evidence, Johnny, just didn't tally up to the official narrative. So what my next move was to get hold of some official documentation. So I got to know the lead detective, a guy called Ron Hoffman, through various phone interviews I did with him.
Mm-hmm.
And on one of the interviews, I just got a feeling that he kind of knew he didn't do a very good job. And I just felt he wanted to absolve himself. And the way he hinted he wanted to absolve himself was by selling me his notebooks and all his paperwork, which I gratefully accepted. So I have a very good media lawyer friend of mine who does these kind of things for a living. And he flew over to see Ron in Florida and met Ron's family, because he does these things properly. We got Ron's family involved, and we exchanged some monies, and we managed to get hold of Ron's original notebooks and interviews and paperwork, which was extraordinary. And it just, for me, that just opened up the whole case, because what that did was it gave me access to all the original interviews that were done on the night and subsequent days afterwards. It gave me access to inventory vouchers of evidence that was found. It was just like shining a massive big light into a very dark tunnel, which is almost what the Dakota is, almost driveway. So for me, that was a game changer for me. And I then started to realize that I had an advantage over everybody else that's kind of looked at this murder, because I could listen to what people said now, and then I could go back and look at what they said back at the time, literally hours after the murder. And often they didn't quite match up. Now, that doesn't always mean it's nefarious. Sometimes, the memory plays tricks. The official narrative has been so well sewn and so well told over so many years, unquestioned for so many years. People then start to see the official narrative and go, well, maybe I was wrong. Maybe I didn't see it that way. And maybe this documentary that came out 30 years later knows better.
Hey, listen, if they were to go back in history and look at some of the statements I made while I was working in hotels about events that happened in the nighttime, I could tell you they're not getting the completely true version. Some of the stuff that was going on was supremely naughty, and there was a lot of it going on all of the time, and people don't talk about the stuff that incriminates them or makes them look naughty or makes them look like they're wild on drugs, partying, and etc. They don't look at these things.
Good point, Johnny. And the mind plays tricks. Let's be honest. But so the first thing I wanted to ask Hoffman was, or one of the most crucial things I wanted to ask him was, what did Yoko say? Now the problem with Yoko is she gave 5 statements that night and the days afterwards, 5 different statements, and they're all different, which is really troubling. Wow. Sometimes she says she got out of the limo first, and then a few hours later she said no, she got out of the limo after John, and then a day later she'll say, well, sometimes I was in front, sometimes he was in front. So she constly covers.
You didn't need to come into my life and bring me this nonsense.
Yeah, mate. It's big. I mean, I have no evidence she shot her husband or.
Yeah. I know. But you
it's
you
troubling.
Know that there's for them to assassinate a person, they need to, at this point, they've had a lot of experience. If we're talking about roughly the same people who have done the multitude of assassinations that have come over the previous decades, they've had a lot of experience, and they know how to create an area that is perfect for control. And to implant the right people, those people who will get close. So if they've got someone working, somebody, it's really usually the people who were closest to them. So,
Well, yeah, and
yeah.
she's a problem because she was a heroin addict in 1980, so she was obviously, that would have compromised her on some degree. So that's a potential factor. I
She
think
was also Yoko Ono.
she was also Yoko Ono. If you talk to a lot of people in the Beatles world, a lot of people who grew up with the Beatles, which I did do, I spoke to a lot of their friends, they're all convinced she's involved. If you talk to people who knew her at the time, they're all convinced she's involved, who are not her friends or her publicist. There's a guy called Elliot Mintz who's a mouthpiece who obviously wouldn't say that. But I had no real evidence. So I was very troubled that she kept on saying, I was here, I was there, I was there, almost covering her bets for any eventuality.
Just very quickly, I also, for people who have recently read my Pottinger pieces and I've read about Gloria Steinem's role, the faux feminist CIA girl who went out with Pottinger for 10 years and ran loads of different operations, was recruited in India by the CIA and talked in glowing terms about the CIA. There's a clip within the article where she's going, oh, but they only did good things and they only nice people and stuff. And basically she was made into a feminist by being by having a little parting in her hair and wearing leather, and that's all it took. And basically what she did for a living was nothing. It was like there was nothing there, and I don't want to accuse Yoko Ono of not being talented at all, to any degree, not having a bit of talent but still managing to get through life on maybe on the back of someone else's talent. But I am probably going to do that over and over again in life. So sorry, Yoko, but I mean, there's a lot. I think there's a comparison to be drawn against what I think Yoko Ono designed herself to be and what Gloria Steinem designed themselves to be.
Could be. I mean, yeah, she's
just
Johnny.
Comparisons. Yeah,
I've always felt that's interesting. I mean, she might.
I think that we both can say that she has never been convicted, tried, arrested.
No. I mean, different statements may have been a PTSD thing. It was a traumatic event.
Well, that's okay. So there's a problem. Now we're discussing whether Yoko Ono is involved in some way because of that fact that there's 5 different statements. How differing are they?
Very different. Where she says John was, where she says she was, when she heard gunfire, what she did immediately after John was shot, what John did, all different. All very slightly different. And it's kind of, is that PTSD or are you just trying to it's impossible to say. But what I do know, here's what's important, Johnny, just quickly finish on this point. The one thing she never has said in 42 years, in those 5 interviews she gave at the time, which I've got now recorded, and since, she's sometimes briefly mentioned the murder in documentaries and books. Though she always says she doesn't really want to talk about it, but sometimes she lets little bits out. What she's never said ever in 42 years is she saw Mark Chapman shoot her husband. Never said it. She said she heard gunfire. John said he was shot when he was walking in the glass doors. She followed John up and she said, get an ambulance. But she's never, ever said, I saw Mark Chapman shoot my husband. So if she was in front and she was waiting at the vestibule, she should have seen it. If she was behind John, the actual lead detective thinks that she was behind. He thinks that Mark Chapman stood between John and Yoko. He actually thinks that John was ahead. Chapman stood between John and Yoko was behind Chapman. Now, if that's true, she'd have seen everything. But she's never, ever said she saw Mark Chapman shoot her husband. So that's crucial because you'd think the person who was next to John or near John that night going into the Dakota would have seen the event. But she never did see the event. That's really important.
That is quite enormous. It does ask a lot of questions. So what are we talking then? In reality, we're talking that the 2 people who were really present, the only 2 people to be really present, were supposedly Chapman and Lennon.
The doorman. And the doorman. Now, what's interesting about the doorman, Johnny, you'd think that would be the most important witness statement of all time, wouldn't you? Right? The doorman should have seen it all. We've never been allowed to see it.
Okay.
We've never been allowed to see it.
You know, if this is what we got, if we've got the doorman That makes no sense. We should know everything about that. We should know everything.
Let's get into him. Let's get into Padermo. Well, the first thing we need to know about Padermo is we don't have his statement. For some reason, the DA's office and the NYPD, they release most statements, but that one they won't release. It's been sealed. I've spoken to people at the DA's office. They said, yeah, we interviewed him multiple times. Where's his statement? We don't get. I think the reason, after what I've investigated and spoken to other people who think they saw what the doorman did, and they spoken to the doorman afterwards, and they got an account for the doorman saw nothing. I think what happened with the doorman is he let John and Yoko out of their car. He went back to his gold booth, heard gunfire, and back into the driveway. The event was over. John wasn't there. Yoko wasn't there. So the problem with the doorman's account is it doesn't actually bolster the official narrative, which is a problem, which is why I believe it's been concealed. But what's interesting about Padermo is for 7 years, from 1980, December 1980 to 1987, no one knew his name. It was always just referred to as the doorman, right? Which gave everybody, so everyone was kind of thinking, well, who is this guy? Then a journalist called Jim Gaines, who I've done an article on my Substack about, he's a counsel of foreign relations, a member of the Council of Foreign Relations. Yeah, I know. Yeah, you can't make it up. Yeah, but he is actually a bona fide journalist. They're not always bona fide when they're attached to this case. And he was at the time writing for People magazine. And he did an article in 1987 for People magazine about Chapman. He got access to Chapman's cell, recorded lots of interviews with Chapman. And he basically said Chapman was talking to the doorman that night. He revealed in 87. The doorman was an ex-Cuban, anti-Castro guy who was talking to Chapman about the JFK assassination and the Bay of Pigs, right?
Oh, so that's convenient.
Yeah.
So my God.
A lot of red flags there. All red flag. So basically everyone went, okay, Bay of Pigs, JFK, Cuba, Castro. Okay, let's look, Jose Padermo. So this is pre-internet, but somehow they got to find out, probably, I'd say in 99 when the internet started to come into use, they realized that there was an operator at the Bay of Pigs called Jose Padermo, who was in a group called Op 40, Brigade 2506, who were a group of basically CIA ex-Cuban far-right assassins who were going to go in after the Bay of Pigs and clean up Nazi style and execute anybody who wasn't part of the program. So Bay of Pigs Jose Padermo was a very, very serious individual. I mean, one of the most serious individuals, because if he was in charge of this brigade of assassins, imagine how serious Jose Padermo was. Now, Jose worked with Frank Sturgis. Frank Sturgis has often talked about him. Sturgis says that Bay of Pigs Jose died in 74. Now, I've looked into Bay of Pigs Padermo, and he was born around about 1912. He died in 74. So
pretty old, man. Pretty old.
Pretty old. It kind of fits. The problem is I've actually found out about Dakota Jose Padermo now, and they are two different people. Dakota Jose Padermo was born in 34. He started working at the Dakota in 69. He stopped working there in 96. He then went on and he died in 2010 or something. So I've kind of got his timeline. He's a completely different Jose Padermo to Bay of Pigs Jose Padermo. But what's interesting is I think Jim Gaines was dropping in the ultimate red herring here. I just think because ever since that 87 article, every single John Lennon assassination theory article, book, whatever, some people have even written books about this, have said, it was Bay of Pigs, Jose Padermo. He's the most serious assassin in CIA history. He must have killed John Lennon, but he wasn't the guy that was on the door. It was a different Jose Padermo. And it's kind of, we were talking earlier about poisoning the well. It's poisoned the well now for a long, long time. Now, I think Dakota Jose Padermo is a very suspicious individual. And I'll tell you why. One, they're concealing his statement, which I think is suspicious in itself. Two, the actions that he did on the night of the murder are very strange. According to the official narrative of Mark Chapman, what Dakota Jose Padermo Dorman did was, after gunfire, Chapman doesn't remember what happened to his gun, but he remembers that it was on the ground in front of him. So perhaps he dropped it there, or perhaps someone else dropped it there. Jose Padermo then kicks the gun, and a witness says he saw him do this, to the back of the driveway, okay, where the vestibule doors are. He then goes and walks up to the gun and starts pacing around it. Now, Chapman at this point is docile. He's taken his coat off. He's standing by the corner of the driveway and by the roadside. He's got his Catcher in the Rye book out, and he's starting to read Catcher in the Rye. Almost, you could say, like a programmed assassin that somehow slightly malfunctioned. But
so
what's
convenient
is,
you came in. So convenient you came on a week after Dana came on.
Brilliant. Brilliant.
talking
Yeah.
about
So,
MK
so
Ultra
well, we're going to get
sub-programs.
into MK Ultra. I'm going to blow
Yeah,
your mind
yeah.
of MK Ultra in a minute, Johnny. So basically, it's going to come into our story very big, very shortly. So basically, what the doorman Jose Padermo does, the curtain, he goes to the gun, starts walking around. Now, I told you about that lift operator, didn't I, Joseph Manny, who's down in the basement. Now, he hears gunfire. He comes up with two colleagues, and the colleagues verify this in the written statements that I got. And he comes out and he sees Jose Padermo. And Joe Manny goes, "What's going on? What was that gunfire?" And he said, Jose said, "Pick this gun up and take it down to the basement and get rid of it." Now, at this point, the gun is not with Chapman. It's with Jose at the back of the driveway. Okay, we don't know that's Chapman's gun, but somehow it's there. Ask yourself this question, though, Johnny. Why didn't Jose pick it up himself? Chapman's docile. He's kicked the gun away from him. Chapman's reading the book, just doing zero. Why did Jose not want to pick that gun up and hide it himself? Why did he wait for someone else to turn up and actually grab the gun, which he did with his own fingerprints? And what Joe Manny then did was his two co-workers was he grabbed the gun, did what Jose told him to do. He went downstairs to the basement, put it in a drawer, came back up into the driveway and went into the back office where he saw Lennon in the back office bleeding out with Jay Hastings and Yoko Ono. Okay, so Joe Manny is quite an important witness. But always when he came back up the first time to get the gun, when he came up the second
So you
time,
think
he saw Chapman.
he's the only like uncontrolled witness around this point by the looks
He
of
is in a
things?
way, Joe Manny, because I've got two other witness statements that tell me what he did exactly. We know he's not lying. Sadly, Joe Manny has lied a little bit. In the interviews I've done with him, he's tried to erase the two co-workers that came up with him. He's tried to sort of get all the glory himself for picking up the gun and taking it downstairs. But what Joe didn't know when he was telling me all these tales was that I've actually got all the statements, and I know that these two people did come up with him, and they went back down with him, and they came up with him again. So he's slightly embellished it to make himself be the sole kind of witness. But what's important about Joe Manny is when he went into the back office to see Lennon and Yoko and Jay Hastings, the concierge, a Dakota resident called Jack Henderson came down to the scene and said he saw Joe Manny and Yoko and Jay Hastings and John's body in the back office bleeding out. So we've got a kind of witness who had nothing to do with the people who were working there that night who said he saw that scene. So we've got that. So here's the thing about Padermo, though. After that, he disappears from history, right? But what's really suspicious about Padermo, Johnny, this is what's incredible, is even though he was a doorman, a few months leading up to John's murder, he wasn't working the door. He allegedly had bad legs. And he was working in the back office with Jay Hastings' concierge. And Jay Hastings and Joe Manny were doubling up to do the door for Jose Padermo because of his bad legs. But that particular night, Jose Padermo says to Jay Hastings, "My legs are feeling okay tonight. It's quite a warm night. I think I'll do the door tonight. I think tonight I'm going to work the front. I'm going to be next to Chapman when he's there. I'm going to make sure that I'm right on the action," which is what he did. And he did work the door that night and saw what he did and did what he did. But then after the murder, I know, it's so suspicious. And then after the murder, Johnny, do you know what he does? He goes back into the back office the next day and says, "I don't ever want to work the door again." So the whole world, when all the cameras were fixed on those gates for days on end, that you didn't see Jose Padermo's face. He was a ghost. He made sure of it. And he carried on working at the Dakota for another, I believe it was 14 years, possibly 16 years, where he worked the back office in the basement. He was doing menial tasks, but he never, ever worked the door again, and he disappeared. So he is a man of great interest, because if Mark Chapman was triggered by somebody, which is the case, I believe, in Syria and the RFK assassination, you do need someone there to kind of trigger a Manchurian candidate to think he's shooting blanks when he's not. Jose Padermo would have been the guy to do that. He would have been right next to Chapman, just him and Chapman all by themselves, ready to go. So it's really important that you get all these statements. See, what's a murder like this, which is why I'm hoping the book will reveal most of it, is you have to take in all these different witness statements, Johnny. You have to take in people like Joe Manny slightly changing the truth.
Yeah.
And you have to kind of give it your best guess, because there's so much noise around each statement and around each perception of the murder. But when you actually coalesce the forensics and the actual where Chapman was and where Lennon was and where Yoko was, and when you work out exactly the geography of the murder itself, you then realize that Chapman couldn't have done it. Because here's the really important thing. I said to Ron Hoffman, the detective, I said, "Ron, where did you think John was when he was struck?" He said, "Well, he was on the stairway, beyond the vestibule doors, in a part of the Dakota entrance that Mark Chapman could not even see never alone shoot Johnny. Remember, Mark's out at the front of the driveway. The stairway is inside the vestibule doors at the end of the driveway, up some steps. So it's kind of completely out of Chapman's view. So I thought, how do I get this verified? So I spoke to Jay Hastings. I said, when did you hear gunfire? He said, well, I heard the door open, the vestibule door. I heard John walking up. I heard the door open, i.e. the vestibule door squeak open. And after that point, when obviously John is now inside the vestibule, then I heard gunfire. And then he said he heard gunfire. Here's another interesting point. He said he heard the vestibule windows break with some bullets going through those glass panels in the doors after gunfire, not during gunfire. He heard gunfire, then he heard those windows pop out. Now, those windows are really important. If you go to my Instagram page, Johnny, Assassination of Lennon, you'll see there's various images that have been, people have tried to conceal these images, but we've managed to get some shots of these doors now. There's 3 bullet holes in these glass panel vestibule doors. But the problem is, Johnny, they're all really low down. They're really low down. They're not upper left chest, upper left back. They're kind of stomach, lower back height, okay? So if they were the bullets passing through Chapman, shooting from the back into the front, they're in the wrong position, okay? Mm-hmm. And another really important point, Johnny, is there's no blood around these glass panel bullet holes. And I've spoken to I've spoken to the cops and the Dakota workers. I said, was there any blood splatter around those bullet holes? They said, no, there was no blood splatter whatsoever. So those bullet holes were caused by someone missing John, not hitting John, because if they were hitting John, you still there, Johnny?
Yeah, I'm still
there. Oh, you there?
there.
Oh, perfect. Right.
Are you talking about, is it this?
Yeah, that's one. That's the bullet hole in the far vestibule door, and you can see the stairs that John staggered up. But if there's another picture further down of the 2 bullet holes, if you go, well done putting this up. If you go right,
give me a second to work it out.
This is very impressive.
It's a future. It's a future.
Keep going. You'll get to.
There's this one.
That's there. That one there. That would do it. Now look that's the door that John walked into. You can see the handle that he had to pull open. That's the one facing Chapman and the roadside. Look at those 2 bullet holes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you go to another one, which is a full length, you can just go to one more, please, Johnny. A bit further down. That one there. We see the door. We see the door and the guys standing near the door. That's that one. Yeah, have a look at that one. Now, see the 2 bullet holes, right? See the guy standing.
Oh, yeah, I see.
See the guy standing behind the door.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Now that little bit of light. That's not a bullet hole. That's just a crack and a light reflecting off the crack. Yeah. So the 2 bullet holes there, that's it. It's those 2 there. They are lower back. They're not upper left chest, and there's no blood splatter. So they could not have been caused by Mark Chapman shooting John and the bullets coming through John's front and into those holes. And remember, behind those 2 men is the bullet hole we saw just earlier leading up to the stairway. So for Mark Chapman's bullets to actually cause that, they'd have had to kind of gone around in a boomerang fashion. To get through.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, those bullet holes shouldn't be there. So, do you know, I think I'm now at the point now, Johnny, where I can kind of reveal what I think happened. I think what happened was, and Ron Hoffman has actually said this on my YouTube channel. There's a clip, there's a piece of news rushes. It's never broadcast. If you go to my YouTube channel, Assassination of Lennon, you can see a Ron Hoffman statement that Detective Hoffman, the lead detective, that he gave outside the Roosevelt Hospital. And he says quite clearly, probably an hour after the murder, before the official narrative has been bedded down, that John Lennon was shot inside the vestibule. Inside. Not outside, not going in. He was shot inside the vestibule. There's another guy called Sean Strube, who was a witness who came along after the murder and got a lot of press coverage, but he didn't see anything. But he said he spoke to the doorman, i.e. Jose Padermo. Again, it's on the YouTube channel. And the doorman says to Sean Strube, John was shot when he was walking inside the vestibule. So we now know that John was shot in an area that Mark Chapman could not see, in the front and not the back. So what I think's happened is it's very much a Sirhan RFK playbook. You've got a patsy, a program patsy, not a program Manchurian candidate, because MK Ultra was very much focusing in those days on getting an MK Ultra patsy, not assassin, someone who wasn't there to kill, but was there to pick up the tab for the murder. And what happened with Sirhan and RFK is, and Lisa Pease has done a great bit of work on her book, A Lie Too Big to Fail, on this. I think she's nailed it. Is that Sirhan was there shooting blanks to take attention away from the real killer, who was standing behind RFK and shot him in the back of the head. And we now know from the autopsy that's come out that that's exactly where RFK was shot. He was shot from behind, not the front. So they always get this kind of front and back exit thing. So I think Chapman was triggered. Perdomo is clearly a suspect for this. To start shooting when John was by the vestibule doors, he starts shooting blanks very loudly. A cab driver called Richard Peterson said he saw him there with a gun at the foot of the headway, at the front of the headway, a driveway. So we know we got another witness that put Chapman there and not at the vestibule doors. So he's 25, 30 feet away from John. When John heard the blanks firing, he goes into the vestibule area, which is where he would have gone anyway, to get away from the gunfire. I believe the assassin, the murderer was there, and I believe he was using a silencer. I believe he walked up to John and surprised him and shot him 4 times, close range, which is what they all say it should have been, including the detectives on the night of the murder said Chapman must have walked up to him and shot him at close range because they were so professional. Shot him 4 times, upper left chest, and I believe he missed with 2 or 3 bullets that then went through the vestibule doors because the assassin would have been on the stairs shooting down into John coming up the steps. And I believe those 3 bullet holes were caused by the second shooter, and I believe the 4 holes in John's upper left chest was caused by a second shooter that was concealed in the vestibule area. And once that was done, that shooter could then go back into the Dakota if he wanted to and stay wherever he wanted to stay, or he could have gone back out into the driveway. And if Chapman was imagining he was doing something that he wasn't really doing, which is what I believe happened, I believe the second shooter could have walked past Chapman, and I doubt if he would even known what was going on. So that is, I believe, what I'm convinced now that that's the only feasible way that Lennon could have been assassinated when you take into account the forensics on the ground, what Chapman said he did, what the medical evidence gives us, and what the detectives at the time said, and where the detectives at the time said John was shot, which is inside that vestibule area on the stairway. So you've kind of, it's game, set, and match, Johnny. It's game, set, and match. There really is no other feasible way. Now, you could say, and they do say, perhaps John turned, which is a really important thing. Chapman could have called out, because one of the narratives that they tried to get into the media was Chapman called out. He must have called out. Chapman has never said he called out. Really important. Why? And if he did, why would he conceal that? I called out and he turned. I shot him. Chapman said he shot him, so why wouldn't he add that detail? Jay Hastings, the concierge, said he never heard anyone calling out to John Lennon. Interestingly, Yoko Ono, in a written statement from Ron Hoffman's book that I put on my Instagram channel, you can actually see the writing yourself, says quite clearly, we heard a noise in the street, we never turned around. We kept walking. So even Yoko Ono said they never turned around. And even if John, let's just say if all of this isn't true, and John somehow did turn around and nobody heard it and Chapman didn't remember it, this is what would have to have happened, Johnny. He'd have had to walk toward those vestibule doors. Chapman would have called out his name. John would have turned around, right? And for those bullet holes to be in those low down positions, he'd have had to get down on his knees or stoop. Chapman would have had to have shot him 4 times in his upper left chest area in a type of loudly, bang, 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 bang. And John would have had to stand exactly dead still for 3 of those bullets to pass through him and then somehow dive bomb down into those low glass panel doors and make those bullet holes. At that point, with these 4 bullets in him that have ripped his heart apart, which we know, it's what the doctors and nurses said, his main arteries of his heart were ripped to shreds. He then turns around. Thank you, Mr. Chapman, for shooting me 4 times. He walks up to that vestibule door, pulls it open, walks up the stairs, walks through some other doors, walks through some other doors, walks through one office, goes into another office. It's just BS. Clearly, that's
so.
impossible.
How does he get into where he gets to eventually?
That's a really, really good question, Johnny. Really good question. And that was something that I've had to really work hard at to assess. And this is where it starts to get a bit dubious with Jose Perdomo and the concierge Jay Hastings, because here's the anomalies. Joe Manny, the lift operator, when he came up to the scene the second time after hiding the gun, he said he went into the concierge's area and he saw John in the back office, okay, which is where Jack Henderson, the Dakota resident, said he saw him and where Jay Hastings said he ran into. But Joe Manny says 2 other things. He says Jay Hastings' shirt was covered in blood, like literally covered from head to toe. So he assumed John must have ran into his arms. And Jay Hastings also said that there was a pool of blood in Jay Hastings' front office, right? And Jay Hastings just imagined seeing this scenario. Joe Manny must have imagined seeing this scenario, the lift operator, that what he thought happened was John must have ran into Jay Hastings' arms in the front office, collapsed on the floor, bled out a little bit, and then somehow Jay and Yoko must have dragged John's body into the back office, right? Mm-hmm. It's the only scenario that he can put together to, come to a conclusion of how that pool of blood got in the front office. But Jay Hastings said no. Joe Manny wasn't there, though we know from Jack Henderson's testimony that he was. Jay Hastings said that there was no Joe Manny. Joe Manny never saw any of this. And John just ran past him and ran into the back office. Then Yoko came in a few minutes later. Oh. So that puts Jay Hastings in a slightly dubious place for me.
They're all in a very dubious place.
They are. They are. Joe Manny, Hastings, and the Perdomo. None of their witness statements match up. They were all there. And they're all dubious. They all lie.
The Dakota lobby sounds like a nightmare, to be perfectly honest. If you want to get to your room, For someone who's worked in many lobbies in many hotels, I can tell you that's not a place I'd want to work.
I'll give you another little bit of detail, Johnny. I'm giving you all the goodies tonight or today. Basically, a man who worked with the Lennons, a guy called Michael Medeiros, who was their kind of plant waterer archivist, nice guy. He was working with them before the murder and after the murder, so he was there. He said the morning after the murder, him and the Lennon's bodyguard, a very dubious guy called Doug McDougall, who was an ex-FBI bodyguard for the Lennons. Would you believe that?
Sorry. Did you? Yeah, wait. So we got to repeat a couple of things there.
Yeah. Let's go for it.
You said the words together with a straight face. You said Doug McDougall.
Yeah. That's
Doug
right.
McDougall. Yeah, you said Doug McDougall. Doug McDougall. You did the dog Dougie. Do the dog Dougie. Yeah. Do the dog Dougie. Dougie McDougall, a good Scottish fan. So you got Doug McDougall doing the doggy. And what else have you got?
Well, here's what's amazing about let's fill in Doug McDougall here. Doug McDougall was their bodyguard, hired by Yoko Ono in the summer that year. And he was an ex-FBI man, right? Oh. Now, ex-FBI agent. And I mean,
for people who don't understand, the FBI were really the instrument used to harass Martin Luther King for many years and eventually assassinate him, in a sense.
There's more I'm going to go into about Doug McDougall in my book. Trust me, a very dark, nefarious character with links to all kinds of dodgy things. But for now, let's go with this. This is the narrative. This is going to blow your mind. A few weeks before Lennon's murder, Doug McDougall upset Yoko by saying to her, you're being a bit loose with your security, allegedly. You need to keep quiet about your movements and where you and John go because you're going to get hit. And she said for giving her that information, allegedly Yoko put him on a leave of absence, right? And he was due to come back to work, guess when? The 9th of December, the day after John's murder, which he duly did. He turned up early morning, 9th of December, to start working for Yoko again, which means no bodyguard.
He did the doggy. Do the doggy. Dougie McDougall doing the doggy. Yeah.
So no bodyguard there that night, Johnny. Doug wasn't working because Yoko made sure of it.
Guy. So again, he must felt awful.
Dubious. So anyway, he turns up that night and he brings in the Pinkerton agency. Right, you know them, with all their machine guns, and the whole thing is locked down with guards and agents with machine guns, all ex-FBI, dodgy men, locked down the whole building. But anyway, Michael Medeiros the next morning, let's move off Doug for now. Michael Medeiros the next morning is asked by Doug McDougall to accompany him downstairs to talk to Jose Perdomo, of all people, the doorman, to find out what the doorman saw and what the doorman knows. Right, so they go down, and when Michael Medeiros told me this, I thought, at last, I'm going to find out what Jose did and what he saw. It was like, again, this light shining into a dark tunnel. So according to Medeiros, he didn't see anything. He basically, as I said, he went back, he let the Lennons out of their car, he went back to the gold booth that he stands in next to the Dakota driveway. He heard gunfire, he came out, didn't see Lennon, saw Chapman standing there. Then he ran to the vestibule stairway area where he saw Lennon's stricken body on the stairway, which fits with what Hoffman said and what everyone, which we now know is where John was hit. He then picks John's ailing body up, bleeding out body, carries him into the lobby and into Jay Hastings' office, possibly front office, possibly back, take your pick. And then he goes back out and confronts Chapman and kicks the gun to the back, and Joe Manny comes up to get the gun. Now, here's the problem with that. When he told me that, I thought, I'd last. We've got the full truth now, and they're concealing his statement because he didn't see anything, and he can't shore up the official narrative. But when I spoke to Jay Hastings, the concierge, about this, who you would imagine would see Jose carrying John's body into the lobby,
most definitely you would see him, wouldn't you?
He said no. He said no, that didn't happen. Didn't see Jose. John just came running in with bullet holes in him, saying, "I'm shot," ran past me, ran into the front office, ran into the back office, collapsed and died. Now, here's a problem with Joe. Another problem with Joe Hastings is his shirt, his bloody shirt that Joe Manny insists to me was just covered in blood. Jay Hastings actually sold this shirt a few years back. And it's you can see it on my Instagram.
Wow! How much
see it on my
that?
Instagram.
Oh,
I think he got about 30 grand, 35 grand for it, something like that, $35,000. But here's the thing: it's not covered in blood. It's not covered in blood, Johnny. It's got a few spots of blood, but it's not covered in blood.
Mm-hmm.
So again, someone is not telling the truth here. It's not. If you go right, it's one of the most right to the top.
Right to the top.
Right to the top, and you'll see it. There it is. There's the shirt itself.
Oh, why this one by here?
Yeah. Does that shirt look covered in blood to you?
No.
So then, when I said to Jay, how did Joe
looks
Manny
deep around the pits there? It looks deep around the pits for sure.
Yeah, I mean, there's
looks like
spots,
an old shirt, but
there's kind of 3 spots of blood. Interestingly, opposite John's.
No, I listen. I remember I worked in one hotel where we had a guy who walked in at like 3-4 o'clock in the morning while we were doing the cleaning up. It was the Holiday Inn in Cardiff City Centre, opposite the castle. And I was managing the place, and I was with this guy, a friend of mine who I had got a job there called Spook. And we got attacked by this guy who would come randomly in. We told him to leave. He wouldn't leave. We tried to coax him out, and then he started attacking us. But the problem was for him, he was terrible at attacking us. So we had it all on camera in the end, because there's courses in the lobby of a hotel. So we were dancing around, and one of us was pushing him while the other one was attracting his attention. And we did this for a while until some mates turned up, and we run over to get his mates, and we're like, "Can you sort out this guy?" And then I turned around, and he's like running towards me. So I swung the guy around in a circle, and his face went straight into like a revolving door, basically. And he lost a load of front teeth, I think, and he broke his nose, and there was blood everywhere. And he just slumped to the floor, and we thought he was dead. And there was his mates standing around looking, and we were standing around, and it was just a stop for a moment, because there was no movement, and we were like, "Oh God, this has ended badly." And my friend Spook leant down and just touched him slightly, and the guy swung up, and Spook had this wonderful Versace shirt on. He cared very much about his brands, did Spook, and the guy covered it in blood, completely covered it in blood, like it was proper, like all drained. As he just tried to get on top of him, and just was spraying blood out all over the place. And so that shirt was covered in blood. Now that looked like a nightmarish scene, and I like that shirt. There's no way that we're talking about the same thing. But anyway,
you're right, Johnny. And I said to Jay, Jay, why did Joe Manny say your shirt was covered in blood? And he said, well, it probably got blood, he said, when I helped the cops carry John's body out to the police car, which is allegedly what happened. In fact, I know it happened because I spoke to the 2 cops who carried John's body out, who came on the scene and carried John's body out to the police car and off to the Roosevelt, where, you know, all the doctor and nurses merry-go-round happened. And I then said to the 2 cops, did Jay Hastings, the concierge, help you carry the body out? He said, no, he never helps carry the body out. I spoke to Joe Manny about it, and he said, no, Jay Hastings didn't help carry the body out. I spoke to witnesses who were out on the street who saw Lennon's body being carried out. Did you see a concierge in the Dakota helping the cops? No. No one, no. It was just the cops carried John's body out. So Hastings said to me he got a lot of blood on his body, on his shirt, helping carry John's bloody body out to the police car with the cops, which he didn't actually do. So Hastings is, but again, it could be like Joe Manny, where just people just embellish and add and try to make themselves more in a story.
You can only do that for a certain amount of time. And if you're doing that within witness statements, then it's criminal, isn't it?
Yeah, Hastings, and here's another thing about witness statements and Hastings. That's an interesting segue. Hastings never gave a witness statement. How strange is that? I said to him, why didn't you give a witness statement? Why didn't you go to the police station and give a witness statement? He said, they never asked, and I didn't want to do it. And we know Dakota Jose went down there. We know Joe Manny went down there. We know
Okay.
a
So
dog water went down there.
that does mean that it is more likely that if that was true and he did do it for those reasons, it is more likely that he would embellish or change his story over time, because he wouldn't have had any reason not to. Like if there's a document that is written down somewhere, people tend not to turn away from it just in case it come up again in the future. So yeah, that would make sense. Go on. Dog Walker went down there.
Dog Walker went down there. Elliot Gross, when he came to the Dakota after we went to visit the Dakota, the chief medical officer, he spoke to one person. Can you guess who he spoke to? Who he went to talk to that night? Jay Hastings.
Wow.
Jay Hastings, the concierge. The only person he spoke to. Jay doesn't remember that conversation, but we know it's on record from other people that he spoke to Jay Hastings. So Jay's a very interesting character. Got no proof he was involved in the murder, but he's a very, very interesting man. He left the work at the Dakota about a week after the murder, maybe 10 days after the murder. He suddenly left the scene immediately. He said he was sacked for being late, which I don't believe, after seeing such a traumatic event, that anybody would sack a worker for being late after witnessing what he witnessed, but that's what he said happened. So I think I've kind of laid the scene with forensics of witnesses and all the different conflicting evidence. I think we've been going 2 hours and 15. You're right to just continue a little bit more, Johnny, because I think what I want to tell you now is where MK Ultra comes into this. Because
most
obviously
definitely. This is a good place to segue towards the
good segue. So Chapman went to the police station that night, Johnny, and he gave a statement which I put on my Substack. I called it Mark Chapman Unplugged. He didn't have a clue what he did and why he did it. He said he had nothing against Lennon, nothing against the Beatles. He didn't know why he did it. He just felt a little part inside him was fighting a big part, and the little part lost or something like that. And he just felt he had to shoot John. He was compelled. He couldn't stop himself. It was a runaway train. A confused man. He didn't even remember the gun being in his hand. He said, I don't know where the gun went. He said, I just remember I looked down, I had a book in my hand, Capturing the Rye, and all the words were kind of fuzzy on the page. And it was like his brain was malfunctioning. One other last thing about Jose Vedmore, I should say, just before we get off all the witnesses. Jose said, according to Chapman, get out of here, run away, right? Which is a very strange thing for someone to say once a gun is no longer on this person and they're docile reading a novel. But also a secondary witness who I managed to get through the files, called Nina Rosen, said that she heard, when she came back on the scene a few seconds after hearing gunfire, she heard Jose say to Chapman, you better get out of here. The cops will be here shortly. They'll be here in a few minutes. Now, that doesn't sound to me like the sort of thing an innocent man would say to a killer who's standing there docile without a gun on him. That's kind of like, for some reason, Jose was desperate for Chapman to run.
Jose was expecting a certain series of events to happen, and suddenly there was a malfunction in Chapman.
You got it.
Okay, so there could be it could be that there was a secondary operation that went once Mark Chapman
to take Chapman out, because Central Park was across the road. If Chapman went to run, I believe Chapman was meant to run, and I believe he was meant to be taken out. A la Oswald in the cinema, and I believe he wasn't meant to live, because there was some very nefarious people, Johnny, who I'll reveal maybe in another podcast with you in my book, who were desperate to talk to Mark and get in his cell after he was arrested. Desperate, very strange intelligence-linked people who were desperate to get into Mark Chapman's cell. Now, one of those people who got into his cell, this is what's going to blow your mind. So if you imagine that Mark Chapman we know for a fact now that he was imagining he was doing something that he couldn't possibly feasibly do, right? So he was having some kind of psychotic episode. You could say he was hypnotized to think he was shooting John Lennon when he wasn't. You could say, I would say certainly. So is there any evidence of MK Ultra intelligence hypnotism going on in Mark's life? Well, here let's just get down to it. I won't go into all the hypnotists that were throughout Mark's life leading up to the murder, but there were many. And they were linked to Christianity, they were linked to the military, and he had hypnotists in his life, all through his life, from the age of 15 to the night 25 when he shot John Lennon. And one of them was a very nefarious character who I believe broke Mark's mind through charismatic Christianity and exorcisms. And this man actually was a well-known preacher who was a well-known hypnotist who was part of an organization, would you believe, Johnny, in the 70s that actually tried to fuse Christianity, or should I say religion, and hypnotism as a good thing. They even had conferences where they talked about how these things should be fused together. Now, these charismatic exorcism prayer groups that Mark went to, Mark said he was deeply disturbed by them. Mark was just coming off a major LSD binge, and he was being kind of, I believe at that point, that was where they were breaking his mind to make it malleable. And I believe they did it through this speaking in tongues, laying of hands. And from that point onwards till today, Mark has always been convinced that he was possessed by demons. And I believe that particular thing was put into him by this preacher / hypnotist when Mark was 15 in 1970. In fact, I know it's a very nefarious character. I'll reveal all about him in my book, but this guy is a very, very dodgy guy. And I believe he was hired very early on to start grooming Mark Chapman to break his mind and get his mind ready to be used in a nefarious way. So let's get to Mark in his cell. A lawyer was hired called Herbert Adlerberg, but after 2 days he got so many death threats on the phone he decided to bail. The second lawyer that came in was a lawyer called Jonathan Marks, a public lawyer, who, for a public attorney, was working in a very plush office called 30 Rockefeller Plaza, which is a quite an expensive place to work for a one-man band doing pro bono work. But Jonathan Marks worked there. But also another company that worked in that very same building was a company called Donovan, Newton and Irvin, which was basically the CIA's law firm. It was run by and set up by, would you believe, Wild Bill Donovan, the man who set up the CIA. That was his law firm, and it was awash with CIA spies and spooks, some current, some old. William Colby, the very same CIA director from the Watergate hearings, he was actually a member. We worked at that firm for Newton. Now, what's really interesting about that firm is a man called David Suggs, who worked at that firm in 30 Rockefeller Plaza, went to work for Jonathan Mark Chapman's attorney. How cozy. So what you've got there is a link with a CIA law firm and Mark Chapman's attorney. Because I was always wondering how these nefarious characters I'm about to tell you about got into Mark Chapman's cell when they came from Mark Chapman's defense. And then when I found out about this David Suggs and about the CIA law firm he worked for and the fact that Jonathan Marks was in the same building, it was all very cozy. Now, I'm not saying that Suggs and Marks did anything untoward. They might have just been suggested to use these people I'm about to tell you about, and they put them in Mark's cell unknowingly, knowing what they might do to Mark. But you do have to ask questions, don't you? So the first guy who bowls into Mark's cell to analyze him, to assess him, was a hypnotist that Jonathan Marks decided to tell the world about in the New York Post. I'm going to get Mark Chapman hypnotized to find out what's going on in his mind. He actually, it was a front page news headline story. But this guy's name, this is what's going to blow your mind now. Let's go back to MK Ultra quickly. I'm sure most of your listeners and viewers know MK Ultra was a CIA program that was multifaceted. There was operations left, right, and center. It went on for decades. It was all about mind control. It was about using psychedelic drugs. It was about getting truth serums. There was hundreds of offshoots, but it was basically one of the main core elements of MK Ultra was to try and create a Manchurian candidate who could kill somebody and not realize they were killing them and forget why they killed them after they killed them. So that was a big thing. And the guy that actually was hired by the CIA to head up the Manchurian Candidate Assassin MK Ultra program was a guy called Milton Kline. Now, we know this because in 1979, Milton Kline went on a documentary, which you can find on my YouTube channel. There's a clip on there where he basically boasts that he can create a Manchurian candidate in a matter of months to kill somebody nefariously for the CIA, which he said he was a consultant for. Milton Kline was the first hypnotist that was put into Mark Chapman's cell by Jonathan Marks. Milton Kline got unfettered access to Mark Chapman. Not only that, Bernard Diamond, the nefarious hypnotist who was working on Siran in the RFK case, he waltzes in to Mark Chapman's cell. Yes, unfettered, unmonitored access. Richard Bloom, military intelligence background, hypnotist. He waltzes in. Now, the problem is, after Mark spent many months talking to these guys on the record, off the record, there are tapes of their recordings, but you can be absolutely certain they weren't pressing record all the time. Mark then rings up his lawyer and says, I've decided now not to plead innocent. I don't want an insanity innocent plea. I'm going to plead guilty. I've decided there's going to be no trial. I'm going to plead guilty. And they said to him, why, Mark? Why are you pleading guilty? He said, well, a little voice inside my head. This is what we were told years ago. A little voice inside my head, I think it was God, said to me, plead guilty. Right? Now, I found out through my research that one of the things that Milton Kline was trying to implant in Mark's mind, because he's actually, Jim Gaines, our Council of Foreign Relations journalist, revealed this in his 87 articles. Milton Kline talked to Mark about a little people kingdom that Mark had in his head. This only came from Milton Kline. Milton Kline was very keen to talk to Mark about a little people kingdom. Half the kingdom were the devil's forces, half the kingdom were God's forces. And Mark and Milton talked about this. None of Mark's friends and family have ever talked about this little kingdom people thing before. This only came from Milton Kline's visits to Mark. And I've discovered now through Mark's appeal in the mid-80s that it wasn't just a little voice in God whispering in Mark's ear to plead guilty. It was actually, what happened was, this is what Mark thought he saw in his cell. He saw a battle between the little people of God and the little people of devil, having a battle on Mark's cell floor. The God's little people won the battle, won the war, and God's general got up into Mark's palm, and God's general from the little people whispered into Mark's ear, plead guilty. And this is the exact little people scenario BS that Milton Kline and Milton Kline only was discussing with Mark Chapman, the CIA Manchurian candidate. He was obviously sent in there to get Mark to plead guilty through some BS reason and make sure that everything I've just told you for the last 2.5 hours about the forensics and the witness statements and the medical never came out in a court of law. Because if it did, it would have been thrown out. It would have been thrown out.
Yeah,
can you believe that?
Yeah, I can, and it makes me keep the thing that keeps coming round. The thing that keeps coming round to me in seeing all of these different cover-ups and cases is this question of like discovery in cases needing to have a trial to put evidence forward so that it is forever within the ether and stuff. There needs to be a way to put evidence forward not connected to a trial. There needs to be a way to do that. There needs to be a way to have like forms of discovery that cause this to happen.
You're right.
A police service, like a police service that you report a crime to, and then they go and investigate, like that. But that's what we don't have at the moment. We don't have this. Always comes down to these like tiny bits of it's amazing. Listen, the story you just told me, and we've been talking for a good 2.5 hours, so I think we're coming up to the end now for sure.
There's more, but I think we've hit most of the main targets.
But I've been enthralled by this story throughout the entire time, and I will go away and I will like chew bits of this up, because there was certain elements of the story you've told to me which kind of like clear up, or at least I don't want to say clear up, add extra weight to how I think these operations look like when they were being enacted. So like the actual assassination, and then the one
mechanics
to cover up. Yeah. And it always seemed to be that one of the problems they've had multiple times is that they can't control the patsy and where he runs off to. I mean, often that like trying to work out what the patsy did just post assassination is usually the eye opener to what was actually happening.
Yes. Before they can get to him. Yeah.
And then afterwards, of course, they when he doesn't get wiped off, they have to bring in a big guy to mess
clean
around
up
in his brain.
Yeah, they got to clean it up. I think just to finish, Johnny, I think you need 4 things to pull this off. You need to groom and condition Mark Chapman to be ready to be a patsy, and that's a long. This process, I'm pretty sure, took over 10 years for them to do, and I could see the line. And it's this hypnotism, intelligence, hypnotism, military intelligence, hypnotism, all the way through the line. All of them, all nefarious characters, all controlled Mark, all the way through. You then need someone on the scene to execute the job. You need that second shooter. You need to get the timing right. You need to have someone there to trigger Mark Chapman, and Jose Vedmore is a major suspect for that. Mm-hmm. You then need an NYPD. We haven't even talked about how they just didn't do an investigation, Johnny. That driveway was open the next morning. They mopped up the blood that very night. In the office, it was mopped up. People were coming and going through that driveway the very next day. Mm. The very next day. Yoko Ono, another slightly bad dark mark against her, was after the autopsy the next morning on the 9th of December, which was conducted at 10 o'clock that morning, she cremated his body, John's body, that very afternoon. That very afternoon. She got good old Dougie, Doug McDougal, ex-FBI.
Do the digging, Dougie. Do the digging, Dougie. Do the dig, Dougie. Do the dig, Dougie.
And at a massive piece of evidence, i.e. John's body, which the defence, if they were doing their job, would have asked for a second autopsy and photos and x-rays, but they didn't get a chance to, because Elliot Gross, Mr. Dodgy medical officer himself, did the autopsy, which has still not been concealed to the public, but what I know about that autopsy, it's complete BS. I know a few facts that are on it. None of them match up to what the doctors and nurses say, but anyway, that body was very quickly disposed of. So we lost the ER report and we lost John's body. When you lost those two things, the real evidence that would have blown this all apart was taken away instantly, within hours. So you got that. So you need an NYPD that are not going to do their job properly, and they're going to clean up the scene and take away spent bullets. By the way, we still haven't seen any spent bullets evidence. There's no vouchers. Yeah, we don't know what, but we do know that from the morgue receipt, there were two different types of bullets, one hollow, one non-hollow. You can see an article about that on my Substack. Yeah, different types of bullets that came from John's body. So again, dodgy. So you've got the NYPD who don't do their job properly and cover up. And then the final piece of the jigsaw, you've got people like Jim Gaines, another journalist called Jack Jones, who was actually an intelligence agent, who do the media narrative story. And those two guys, Jim Gaines and Jack Jones, for 42 years have had a clear run through books and magazine articles and documentaries to sow the seeds of the official John Lennon narrative.
Yeah. Those are guys I've seen. Those are the type of guys that I've seen work on cases before. They bring out these. It's always a couple of coppers, a couple of journos, and they basically mop up all of the information and make it.
And the mainstream media say nothing.
How that comes to fruition, I do not know. How that comes to fruition, like how they can and how they decide, how they recruit, how it's managed. It's
multifaceted.
What. Yeah,
it's multifaceted. So it's not one body, it's not one group. I think it was a disparate, connected bunch of people who all came together, possibly under Richard Nixon's auspice, but it may have gone beyond him, or above him or below him. But there was I identified a group of people who were all hired to do certain particular jobs in this operation. And they came together to have that one outcome that they all wanted. Because remember, John Lennon was anti-religion, he was anti-capitalism, and most importantly, I believe he was anti-war. So there was a lot of people who would have wanted to take him out for what Reagan was about to do in the 80s because of those reasons. And I think, it was a very convenient murder for Reagan's government. And it was a very convenient murder, for that regime.
No, I thanks for being on, David. Listen,
thanks, Johnny.
This is really important, and I feel a little bit teary about it. I feel that in that case, then it sounds like the legend of the working class hero, like it came round full swing, didn't it? He did not disappoint one iota. John Lennon was legendary, highest order, full of love, full of care, battled to the end, and taken out by the same evil, the same monsters that defend all of the evils in the world, and all of the things that John Lennon stood up against. It's extraordinary. What a hero! God.
He was so brave. He walked it like he talked it, Johnny, and he knew he was putting himself in harm's way. He knew he was.
I really mean it. I'm gonna go. I'm gonna sit outside my house. I'm gonna get my laptop on. I'm gonna do some research, edit a few
Great.
things, maybe do
Please,
this, and
please
I'm gonna stick
help
Lennon
out.
on.
Yeah.
I'm gonna stick Lennon on, nice and loud, and I'm gonna have a few tears over an alcoholic ginger beer. I think.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. We should remember what it's horrible. I've been in this dark murder now for 3 years, Johnny, and sometimes you forget the light that John gave us through his music and his message.
Oh, yeah.
And it has been, that light has been dimmed through his horrible murder and the bullshit that's been put around his murder that we've all had to swallow now for 42 years.
Mm-hmm.
And, I get people online saying, oh, you're disrespectful to his family for, looking into this now. I think the only disrespect to John and his family is ignoring the truth. And John was obsessed with the truth or trying to get to it. And he was a very honest man, often, to his own detriment. And I think he would want his murder to be properly investigated. And that's all I want, really, Johnny. I want his murder to be investigated properly, which it clearly wasn't done back in the day. And I don't think the mainstream media are going to get on board, because ultimately, if they do, what they're saying is, Johnny, is for 42 years we got it wrong. And there's a lot of ego in there. And there's also a bit of cowardice. And they don't want to be called conspiracy theorists. And they're just going to just go along with it until they can't, until the noise becomes so big that they can't ignore it. And I think I'm a few years away from that. Hopefully my book will lead to that. We'll see. But it's my forthcoming book. So we'll see what happens, Johnny. I can sleep well at night now. I've gone down this hole now for 3 years. And it's not, I wouldn't say I've enjoyed it, to be honest with you. And sometimes I even sort of say to myself, Johnny, why the hell am I doing this? I feel compelled to do it.
I got something going through my mind.
Yeah, no, please do.
I gotta say to you at this point, me and you, we do a similar thing. We look for these cycles, and we look for these events, and we look for the way it works, and we watch it turn around and round. And it just, all I could hear was Lennon's his own song. I remember sitting on my way to work one time and feeling really sick when I was at my sickest, and on was I'm just sitting here watching the wheels go round.
Yeah, great song. Great song.
I just love to watch them. That's I think what we do. We look for the wheels, we look for the cycles. We are watching the same things, and he was watching the same things, and at the same time we do it with the hope that things can get better from knowledge.
Yeah.
So thanks. Can you tell people where they can find you? And what
thanks, Johnny. I think most of what we've spoken about has been put in article form on my Substack, davidwhelan.substack.com. Please go there. Please subscribe. Please share. Get the message out. There's about 20 articles on there now. They're all in depth. You can find a lot of video and image information on my Instagram and YouTube channel, Assassination of Lennon, all one word. And I'm on Twitter, Lennon Murder. You can follow me there and hook up with me there. And my message to everybody is, please spread the word. Let's tell people that John Lennon's murder was not investigated properly. There is 1,000 anomalies that need to be addressed. I'm not saying I have the complete 100% solution to what went down. But what I am saying is what we were told went down clearly didn't go down, and we need to find out the truth, because we owe John Lennon that. We owe him the truth for all the great things that he's given us in his lifetime. And, his message of truth and bravery and standing up to power is a message I think we can all still get hold of and use to move forward.
And cheers, David. Thank you so much for coming on. And
thanks, Johnny.
It means a lot. It's been emotional.
No, I really enjoyed it, and I hope have I now convinced you that there is stuff to look into now?
Yeah. I think what I'll say is that there's a lot more to learn, obviously, and I'll be getting to know more, because me and you will be speaking again when we.
Oh, for sure. There's lots more to talk about. Thanks, Johnny.
On the podcast.